Hey guys, you are watching your Monster Izuku fanfiction. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Deku chose Quirklessness. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. All Might had told him that if he was quirkless, it just wasn't possible for him to be a hero. Izuku turned his gaze towards the darkening sky, reflecting on the revelations All Might had given him. He was still shell-shocked that the greatest hero was crippled, not unlike Izuku himself in a way. He knew full well what it was like to have to deal with a weak body, and Izuku respected All Might even more for continuing to do hero work despite his disability. But it still stung when All Might told him that he couldn't become a hero without a quirk. He closed his eyes, forcing the frustration he felt down. That was fine. Izuku had planned for this if and when it ever came to pass. He was a smart kid, he made good grades, and even if he couldn't become a hero, that didn't necessarily mean he couldn't be involved with them in some way. He could look into the support class of UA if he was admitted despite his quirkless state. Yes, that was a possibility. Not to mention Katsuki would be pissed if he didn't make it into UA with him. His lips quirked up in a small smile at the thought of his friend. Katsuki was rough around the edges and well, okay, he was actually a complete asshole, but they'd known each other since they were 3 and he was the only friend Izuku had. The guy was honestly like an angry mother hen, if angry mother hens could make big explosions and screamed at everyone for annoying them. Suddenly, an uproar from a nearby street grabbed his attention. He blinked and approached the crowd, trying to figure out what was going on. He spotted several heroes keeping the crowd back, away from a huge fire and a writhing mass that looked disturbingly similar to. Izuku stared in horrified disbelief. It was the sludge villain that had tried to possess his body earlier. The one All Might had captured. He must have escaped somehow when I was nagging All Might, Izuku realized. Guilt swelled up in him until he almost felt sick. This is my fault. Everyone stay back. That was Kamui Woods, shouting at the crowd. The villain has taken a hostage. Please back away and remain calm. That must have been why the heroes weren't fighting the villain, Izuku realized as he worked his way to the front of the crowd to see better. From what he could see, none of the heroes had a quirk that would work well against this particular villain. Some were doing their best to put out the flames raging in the street, but they couldn't approach the villain himself. He found himself silently praying that All Might was nearby and would do something about this. The villain suddenly turned so that Izuku had clear line of sight to the hostage's face. It was Katsuki. His eyes were wide in terror. Before he even realized what he was doing, Izuku bolted past the heroes and straight towards the villain. Wah hey! Kamui Woods roared after him. Get back here! Are you insane? Izuku ignored him. He had the sludge villain's attention now, and he certainly recognized Izuku from before if the flash of anger in his shifty eyes said anything. The villain forced Katsuki's body to move, causing several of the boys' explosions to burst out in Izuku's general direction. They missed him, but the blasts destroyed a car and made the fire around them rage further out of control. He hurled his backpack at the villain, smacking the villain in the eye and causing him to recoil briefly in annoyance. Izuku started to scrabble desperately at the sludge imprisoning Katsuki, trying to free him with everything he had. Deku! Katsuki managed to gasp out, glaring in bewildered fury at his classmate. Beat it! What are you doing here? I came to save you! Izuku screamed. Get lost! Katsuki roared back. You'll get yourself killed. You little brat! The villain snarled, forming a huge fist of sludge to pulverize him with. To make matters worse, the villain had gathered up bits of sharp metal from nearby debris. If that hit Izuku head-on, it would make a mess of his already frail body. Die already! In the crowd behind them, All Might lunged forward in his muscle form. He couldn't ignore what Izuku had just said. He was already kicking himself for letting the villain escape, and now this quirkless boy had taken it upon himself to act when no one else including himself had done a thing. He felt so ashamed of himself that his deteriorating condition flew to the back of his mind so that he could save the 2 boys before him. But he wasn't going to make it. All Might reached out desperately as the villain's fist came down on Izuku. Izuku stared at the incoming blow with terrified eyes, but greater than his fear was the desperation he felt to save Katsuki. He felt it all bubble up inside of him as his friend's eyes rolled into the back of his head from unconsciousness, pushing him over the edge. Let him go. There was a blinding flash of emerald light, momentarily stunning All Might in his rush, but when his eyes recovered they widened in shock. That's wild. Emerald fire blazed around Izuku's body, wrapping around him in a protective shield and causing 2 locks of hair on his head to rise up like flowing horns. The flames surrounding them intensified and flared, causing the villain to flinch away from the boy. What? The villain screeched. Why do you have that? You monster. Izuku looked up at him, desperate anger in his eyes. He brought his right hand back, drawing in the fire around them and changing it into more emerald flames. With an almost feral cry, he thrust his hand forward and sent a torrent of flame at the villain. The surge of green fire smote the villain and tore him from Katsuki's body, setting the sludge alight until it was boiling from the heat. He screamed in agony as Katsuki collapsed, now free of his captor, but exposed to the fire as well. All Might acted in that instant, creating a blast of air with a single, overwhelming blow towards the ground. Detroit smash. The explosion of air pressure blew all the flames away, and though it knocked Izuku off his feet, it managed to save Katsuki, and to a lesser extent the sludge villain, from being burned to death. All Might blinked as the emerald fire around the boy vanished instantly and what few flames remained around them fizzled out. His experienced eyes surveyed the aftermath of the boy's unexpected attack. Thankfully, the majority of the blaze had been concentrated on the villain and had left everything else relatively unscathed, allowing All Might to wonder about Izuku for a moment. He approached the boy and knelt to inspect him, but he was obviously unconscious. Can I become a hero even though I don't have a quirk? I want to be able to save people with a smile on my face, just like you do. All Might's eyes narrowed, perplexed. That's what he said, but those flames were definitely his doing. Was he just lying? He dismissed that thought almost as soon as it came to mind. No, he wasn't lying. There's no faking that kind of honest desperation. The kid was an enigma, a curious one at that. All Might found himself legitimately interested in what was going on with the boy. Izuku was quiet on his way back to the apartment. Following a quick medical checkup to make sure he was alright and a brief chewing out from some of the heroes, he was dismissed and allowed to go home. None of that really bothered him since Katsuki had ended up being alright as well. That was obvious enough when the boy yelled at Izuku for being stupid and jumping into a dangerous situation without a quirk. Or rather, jumping into danger without a quirk that he could use. He tilted his head back so he was looking at the sky with a despondent expression. I did it again. I am here. Izuku nearly jumped out of his skin as All Might came racing from out of nowhere and ended up standing on the street in front of him. All Might, what are you doing here? Just wanted to chat hack. All Might spat up blood as he reverted from his muscle form into his skinny true form. He wiped the blood from his chin and looked at Izuku with a raised eyebrow. What's up with the long face? Oh, it's nothing, Izuku said a little too quickly, waving his hands back and forth. I see, the man grunted. He studied Izuku for a moment. That was some quirk back there. The grip Izuku had on his backpack strap tightened. I guess. You told me earlier that you were quirkless, All Might went on, his eyes boring into the nervous child. Why tell me that if you had a quirk? It was a mistake, Izuku replied, looking away from him. I didn't mean to flare up, I don't ever want to use that quirk. It scares people. All Might had a hunch about what was going on here. The more he looked at this kid, the more he felt like he was looking at someone else. Someone he'd encountered back in his prime over a decade ago. Plus the way his flames had looked back there, the way they coiled around the boy's body and formed those fiery horns on his head. You're Heat Viper's kid, All Might said at last. The way the boy's face grew pale and his fists clenched was answer enough for the hero. He's not my dad, Izuku answered vehemently, surprising All Might with his intensity. The boy was starting to sweat and he looked like he was on the verge of having a panic attack. That guy isn't my dad. Yeah, he's my parent, but he's not my dad. I don't even know him. I'm nothing like him. Breathe. All Might stepped forward and interrupted him with a hand on his shoulder. Izuku almost flinched away, but All Might's grasp was firm. It kept him steady. The hero's voice lowered to a gentle tone. I don't think you're like him, either. Izuku choked, his body going boneless from those words, and fell forward. All Might kind of expected that, so he held the boy up and just let him cry for a moment. The hero quietly sighed now that his suspicions were confirmed. His quirk is so similar to Viper's that I actually stopped in my tracks back there, All Might thought to himself. And I'm a pro. If any normal person saw that and knew who Viper was, sheesh, no wonder the kid said he's quirkless. He probably tells everyone that so they don't freak out. Are you gonna be okay? Izuku sniffed and stepped back, pulling out a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his eyes and nose. Why yeah, sorry, I'm just stressed. I haven't used that quirk since I was 7, so I'm a bit overwhelmed. All Might hacked up more blood in disbelief. 7. Wait, how old are you again? 14. You haven't used your quirk in 7 years. All Might was stunned. The boy nodded meekly. I accidentally flared up in the 2nd grade once and my teacher had an actual heart attack just from seeing it. Her husband was a victim. All Might's eyes cleared in understanding. And you found out about Viper right after that? I didn't want to hurt or scare anyone because of that quirk again, so I just never used it again. I thought if I worked hard enough on my own, I could become a hero without a quirk, but I guess I can't. I'm still gonna shoot for the support class in UA though. I think I can do that. All Might was silent for a long while as he studied the boy's face. Izuku looked tired and scared, but there was a fiery determination in his eyes that reminded him of, well, himself. A boy with no quirk, well, sort of, that had the drive to become a hero through his own efforts so he could help people. The way he'd moved to save his friend from the sludge villain had amazed All Might. He hadn't moved from willpower or any mental drive. He'd just moved instinctively, without thinking, without hesitating, when even All Might had stopped and hoped that another hero might come by. Well, he'd be damned if he just sat back and watched this kid jump into the support class in UA. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but this boy needed to become a hero. Izuku, All Might said suddenly. You can become a hero. Izuku froze and stared at him, wide-eyed. But you said. I was mistaken, he interrupted. Back there, despite having no quirk to fight with, you jumped in to save your friend when no one else would. Myself included. You were more heroic than anyone else in that moment. I say it again. You can become a hero. The boy looked torn between shock and joy, but they were quickly overwhelmed by uncertainty. But I don't have a quirk I can use. I have a solution to that, All Might told him. But I offer it to you on one strict condition. I want you to learn how to use your quirk. Izuku edged in a sharp breath. No, let me finish, damn it, the hero chuckled. He pat the boy's shoulder. I want you to learn how to use it for your own good. You flared up today because you don't have any control over it. That's not something you want happening in a dire situation. As a hero, you absolutely cannot risk losing control of a quirk as powerful as that. Do you understand? Izuku was quiet as he looked towards his feet. All Might went on. I'm not saying this to give you a hard time. I'm saying this because you need to hear it. That power might remind people of Viper, but it's your power. You don't have to use it in public if you really don't want to, but I want you to learn how, anyways. There are people who fear that fire, but there are also people who probably need it. Need it? Izuku asked, disbelieving. Who would need a quirk like this? Who knows? Perhaps someone who is cold or in need of a light. All Might laughed again. I certainly can't flare up to warm someone or make a dark room brighter with my quirk. Start out with little things like that if you need to. But my point is, I want to see you make that power into something that people find comforting. The boy swallowed hard. But what if it scares people? It will scare some, the hero said. I will admit that at first, your quirk will probably bring up some bad memories from older folks. But power is neither good nor bad, just how its wielder makes it so. If I were a villain, super strength quirks would probably be feared all over the world. All Might looked into Izuku's eyes steadily. It's up to you to make your power into something that people seek out instead of something they run from. But to do that, you have to stop running from your power first. Which brings me back to my main point. All Might jabbed a finger towards Izuku. I've deemed you worthy of inheriting my power. I'm talking about my quirk. Listen up and listen close, kiddo. All Might spread his arms out to either side of him in a grand gesture. My quirk was passed on to me like a sacred torch that is given from bearer to the next. You heard me, and I've tagged you as my inheritor. Wait, what? Izuku yelped, going into full-on stutter mode. He began to mutter furiously to himself as he processed that. It's true that your quirk is hotly debated by everyone and no one really knows what it is. But I've never heard of such a thing, and it's not even among the craziest theories I've seen, and I've seen some really crazy theories, but there's never been a record of a quirk that could do that, since everyone has their own inborn traits that make up their quirk and lets them establish themselves, and that's why they're considered unique. So a quirk that could be passed on to others could never happen because... Holy shit, hit the brakes there, motor mouth, All Might snapped, cutting Izuku off. I keep a lot of things to myself, but I don't lie. The power I was granted was the quirk that transfers power. It's called One for All. One person cultivates the power, then passes it on to another, who then cultivates it further and passes it on yet again. As time goes on and it builds, that strength grows and allows those inheritors to save people. I've been searching for a successor for ages, ever since I was wounded so badly. You're the first person I've ever thought I'd be okay with passing this power on to. Izuku was honestly still trying to process everything, but he felt beyond honored that All Might considered him of all people worthy of such an amazing gift. But he still had doubts. But, is that okay? I have that quirk. It doesn't matter to me, All Might told him gently. If you want to just rely on One for All and put your own quirk to the side, that's up to you, but I still want you to learn to use it for the reasons I stated earlier. Or you can use both One for All and your quirk together. Actually, I would have offered this to you even if you were truly quirkless. This has nothing to do with whether or not you have a quirk, kiddo. This is because I can see you becoming a great hero. The hero laughed as Izuku lifted his hand to wipe his eyes again. Of course, it's up to you. If you trained enough, you could become a hero with just your quirk, or you could join the support class at UA. Izuku shook his head, as if there was a choice here. He cleared his face of tears and gave All Might the strongest look he could. I'll do it. All Might grinned, an answer without hesitation. I figured as much. All right, kid, then I hope you're ready for the road ahead, because I won't go easy on you. Yes, sir. Phew, I made it. Izuku stopped to catch his breath as he stared at the huge UA buildings at the front of the campus. It had been 10 months since Izuku had agreed to become All Might's successor, and in that time, he'd put his body through absolute hell. All Might had made him train like a maniac, pushing his body to its very limits and beyond. He'd explained that Izuku's body back then was too weak to inherit One for All right off the bat, so he had to build himself up to handle the extraordinary power. He'd definitely bulked up a fair bit, although Izuku still looked like a skinny kid at first glance. The now 15-year-old's physique didn't compare to All Might's one bit, but that was fine for now. He had made it to the starting line, and that was all that mattered. Izuku quietly groaned. His sore muscles were aching from the strain he'd put them under this morning to finish clearing all that trash from the beach. Thinking back on it, he lifted one of his hands to cover his mouth. Eat this, All Might had ordered with that big grin on his face as he held up one of his own blonde hairs to Izuku. The boy just stared at him with a dumbfounded expression. All Might laughed uproariously. It doesn't matter what it is as long as you take in my DNA. It's way too different from what I imagined. Izuku yelped as All Might practically shoved the hair into his mouth. Enough of that, bottoms up kiddo. Despite Izuku's feeble protests, he did eat the hair. It was about as pleasant an experience as you could imagine it would be. The way it just dragged down his throat was just gross. Good, now don't throw that up, All Might chuckled. I don't feel any different, though. Of course not. How do you think your stomach works? It'll take a little time for you to digest the hair, but you'll probably feel something by the time the exam starts. Izuku shuddered and went to go grab the shirt he'd set aside earlier. Got it. I gotta get home and take a shower and eat before the exam in a few hours. All Might turned his gaze towards the ocean, the view now completely void of any obstruction. We turned you into a vessel that can house one for all, but it was made in a hurry. You didn't even get to take it on a test run. Prepare yourself for the repercussions that it will have on your body. Izuku glanced over his shoulder at the hero. What do you mean? You'll see, All Might replied. In any case, focus on using one for all today. With all the time we spent building up your body to house it, we didn't get to actually work on your original quirk at all. Ideally, that's what I'd recommend you use for this exam. I'm not sure if I can use it in front of people yet, Izuku mumbled nervously. I know, so like I said, focus on using one for all today. All Might pat the boy's shoulder with one of his huge hands. We'll get you comfortable with your quirk now that you've got one for all as well. It'll just take time. Focus on the exam for now, young man. Yes, sir. Deku. Izuku jumped, torn from his thoughts by the familiar voice. He turned and spotted Katsuki walking towards him. Oh, Katsuki. Hey. Katsuki looked a little baffled in an irritated sort of way. What are you doing here? I thought you were gonna take the support course test. Oh, well, Izuku scratched the back of his head as the other teen reached him. I decided to try for the hero course. You serious? Katsuki tilted his head. Dude, you haven't used your quirk since like the 2nd grade. Do you even remember how? I think it'll be okay. They were walking towards the entrance together now. I want to try at least. Don't tell me you're still scared of people freaking out about it. Katsuki scoffed in annoyance. You can't out just because everyone else is terrified of your badass quirk. It still ain't as awesome as mine, though. Izuku's sweat dropped. I'm pretty sure the whole reason he ended up being friends with me is because he wanted to prove that he was better than everyone who was scared of my quirk. What? Y'all can't handle a little green fire? What a bunch of pussies. Go drown yourselves to death, then. He smiled slightly at the memory. Katsuki was abrasive and frankly a total ass to pretty much everyone, including Izuku to a certain extent, but he was a bit more friendly around Izuku. Part of that was because they ended up in a video game club together at middle school and were the best players there. Heck, they'd even won a video game tournament held between all the schools in the region. He was kind of like Katsuki's sidekick in a way, so the other teen was slightly more tolerant and less abrasive towards him. Just slightly. You're getting into UA, right? Katsuki demanded, giving him a sideways glare. Izuku nodded. Even if I don't pass the hero examination test, I'll take the support class test. I can definitely get into that one. No shit. You've gotta in. Library in that goddamn head of yours. Katsuki rapped his knuckles against the timid boy's forehead. And you take way too many notes. Just get in, got it. It'll piss me off if you fail. I got it, Izuku promised. On now he was tripping on his shoelaces. Or I'll just die, he thought as he waited for the inevitable impact. Except he didn't hit the ground and just remained suspended in midair. Katsuku gave him a weird look as Izuku yelped and squirmed in the air, but didn't fall. Are you all right? The boys looked up to find a teenage girl standing there with her hand on Izuku's backpack. She had shoulder-length brown hair, big brown eyes, and rosy red cheeks. Carefully, she helped to right Izuku so he was back on his feet before she clapped her hands together and smiled. Sorry I used my quirk without asking, but I figured it would have been bad luck if you tripped, you know. Did nerves get to you? I'm kinda nervous too. Good luck. Before either Izuku or Katsuki could say a word, she was walking off. Katsuki just stared after her with a face like he couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or not. A huge smile spread over Izuku's face and his eyes practically sparkled. I just talked to a girl. You didn't say a damn thing, you dumbass. Katsuki snapped at him. And wipe that weird look on your face. It's creepy as. Once they were in the auditorium, the lights hit the stage and they were greeted by a pro hero named Present Mike. The man had a wild haircut, spiffy glasses, and a big speaker fixture wrapped around his neck. He also apparently had never heard the phrase, "Keep it down," because he was being obnoxiously loud. "Welcome everyone to my live show." He shouted into the mic and jabbed his fingers out to either side of him at the crowd. "Everybody say hey." He put a hand to his ear, but all he got was silence. "Tough crowd." Mike laughed. "Whatever. I'm gonna give you the rundown on how this exam is gonna go. Are you ready?" More silence was his answer, though Izuku was muttering to himself out of habit. "Holy crap, it's really him. I listen to his talk show on the radio every week. The lecturers at UA really are all pro heroes." "Shut up," Katsuki growled beside him. "Pay attention, listeners," Mike shouted. "We'll be seeing if you got skills to pay the bills in a 10-minute practice run at our replica city district. You can take whatever equipment you want, just gather at your designated meeting area after my presentation, ya dig?" Katsuki looked from the card he had for his test to the one Izuku had, noting that they were in different districts. "It's set up so that we can't work together with people we know, huh?" "That makes sense," Izuku muttered. "It'd be too unfair if some people had others helping them out to stock up on points." "That's fine, though," Katsuki dismissed. "If you got stuck in my exam, I'd end up taking all the points for myself, anyways." Izuku wasn't at all insulted by his friend's greed for points. That was kind of the objective here, after all. Mike was talking again. "There'll be loads of faux villains spread all over the battlefields and each one will be rated as a 1, 2, or 3-pointer. Your job is to use your quirk to take out as many of them as you can and rack up a high score. Also, you can't attack other competitors directly. That's nasty anti-hero stuff and it's against the rules, ya dig?" "Excuse me." All eyes were suddenly drawn to a student in the stands, a young man wearing glasses who bore a very stern expression on his face. On the handout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is an error, then it's a huge embarrassment for a top-tier national academy of UA's caliber. What is the meaning of this? Also, you. The other teen suddenly twisted to glare at Izuku, who jumped in surprise and fright. "Quit muttering to yourself. We're trying to pay attention. If you think UA is just for fun, then leave this place at once." Izuku practically melted into his seat from embarrassment, covering up his face as most of the other students started to chuckle at him, but he was saved from complete humiliation by Katsuki. The teen snarled and stood up, placing his foot on the railing as he yelled at the guy who had called Izuku out. "The hell did you say? I'll kick your ass." The other boy recoiled from Katsuki's rage as he swept his glare over the rest of the kids in the room who were still laughing. He held up one hand threateningly and let a few small explosions pop off in his palm. "Anyone else wanna talk shit? Shut up and mind your own business, extras." Most of the kids did as he said, though a few looked ready to pick a fight with Katsuki. Present Mike broke it up before things could get ugly. "Woohoo, save that aggression for the test, kiddos. I can't say I don't like it though." "Thanks, Katsuki," Izuku barely managed to get out as he peeked between the gaps of his fingers. Katsuki sat down and crossed his arms with a huff, still glaring in annoyance at the kid who had started the whole thing. "Nobody gets to mess with you but me." Mike pointed at the teen with the glasses. "You make a good point, young man, so let me explain. The 4th type of villain is called the 0-pointer. It's a big gimmick that goes wild in tight places, ya dig? If I were you, I'd do my best to avoid that." "I see. Forgive my interruption." The teen made a huge bow and sat back down. "Well, that's enough from me," Mike went on. "I'll leave you with a quote that my academy prides itself on. Go beyond, plus ultra. Now get out there and have a great time suffering this trial." Holy crap, it's huge. Izuku gaped at the massive duplicate city laid out before them. Geez, the place could have been its own town. He knew that UA was top of the line and was notorious for going to extremes to train heroes, but this was more than he'd expected. Glancing around at some of the other students, Izuku noticed that some of them had equipment to match their individual quirks. He kind of wished he had something like that. Not that it matters. "I don't think I can use my flames here and I've never used one for all before. I'm not sure what kind of equipment would work best with it." His eyes suddenly found a familiar figure, the girl who had kept him from falling when they first arrived. "Oh, that girl from before. Maybe I should go say hello." I need to thank her for earlier, anyways. You, stop right there. Izuku went stiff as a board at the sound of that awfully familiar voice, uptight and stern. Oh great. That girl is trying to concentrate. Don't go over there and interrupt her. The glasses-wearing teen who had called him out walked over and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. There was a warning look in his eyes. Who are you, anyways? Are you here to obstruct us during the exam? He jumped. And no. Oh, of course and not. Several of the other kids started laughing as they watched, commenting on his jumpiness and the nerves Izuku was obviously dealing with. He hung his head in embarrassment. They think they're lucky to have me as an opponent. Start. Everyone stopped and turned towards Present Mike, who was standing on an observation tower. They all looked confused, but the pro laughed and yelled again. What are you waiting for? There ain't a countdown in a real battle, you greenhorns. Get those legs moving. Huh. Izuku blinked, then he realized that everyone else was already running into the district. Oh, crap. He blitzed after them, desperate to catch up with the rest of the pack. It's fine. I fell behind a little, but it's fine. I've got All Might's quirk now. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. A building to his side suddenly exploded, making him skid to a stop. Izuku's eyes widened as a robot emerged and fixed its single eye on him. 1 point. Target locked on. Kill. The robot lunged at Izuku, who froze in place. Shit, how do I use one for all? I still don't feel any different. It was too fast and close for him to dodge, so he glanced around rapidly. No one was in sight, so maybe. He ducked under the robot's swing and grabbed the bot by its thin wire neck, then let his own quirk flare up. Instantly, he was wreathed in green flames and the heat caused the robot's sensitive circuits to overload and fail. The steel creature collapsed, neck sizzling from the heat. Izuku immediately stopped the flames and looked around frantically. Good, no one saw me. Maybe if I sneak up on more of them on my own, I can take them out until One for All starts working. It should be working soon, right? 6 minutes and 2 seconds left. Mike's shout pushed him to run off again. He had only gotten 1 point in 4 minutes. He needed more points fast. He found an intersection that was crawling with robots, but they were all being taken out by a mass of students. He saw the girl from earlier touch several of them so that they floated up, then with a clap of her hands, they fell and were destroyed. She set her hands on her knees, breathing heavily before she moved on. That's 28 points. 28. Izuku jumped as the teen with the glasses came out of nowhere and destroyed another robot's head with a huge kick. That's 45 points. 45. He started to panic. They never told us how many villains there were. If I don't get a move on, all of them might be taken and I'll fail. He was about to run off to try and find more isolated villains like before, but before he could do anything, the ground began to shake. Izuku flinched and his jaw fell open in terror as a massive robot appeared further down the street, destroying a building in the process. It had a big 0 on its forehead. Isn't that way too much? He fell to the ground, cowering at the sight of the behemoth robot as it made its way towards them. The other students were already scrambling to get out of its way. Izuku felt like he was on the verge of a panic attack. No, I only have 1 point. I gotta run, but I gotta get points. Why can't I feel One for All yet? Where is it? All the work I did with All Might will be wasted if I can't use it. Ow. He froze and looked over his shoulder when he heard the cry of pain. Izuku realized that the girl who had helped him before had collapsed and was trapped under some rubble. She looked like she was gonna be sick and couldn't move even with the 0-pointer coming at them. She would be crushed. He was going for the robot before he even realized what he was doing. Izuku crouched as he charged, feeling a rush of power surge through his body. He jumped up, surging into the air like a rocket towards the 0-pointer. His fist clenched as he forced that power through his arm, tearing his sleeve with the raw force it gave off. When you use One for All, squeeze your ass super tight and yell this at the top of your lungs. Smosh. Izuku drove his fist into the 0-pointer, unleashing One for All's devastating force and pulverizing the robot as though it were made of styrofoam. The steel behemoth was lifted off the ground and hurled back with a massive crash, utterly destroyed by the impact. He hovered in the air for a moment, shocked by the degree of damage he'd done, but like all things under gravity's influence, he started to fall. Whoa, shit, Izuku yelped, flailing to regain his balance. Crap, I gotta calm down. This is All Might's power, so I should be able to land all right now. He was suddenly made aware of his right arm and both legs flopping around at very unnatural angles. Izuku had time to blink at his ruined limbs before pain like nothing he'd ever felt before sent lightning through his nerves. He screamed as he fell, clutching his destroyed arm with his left hand. Tears flew from his eyes and he struggled not to vomit. I'm an idiot. This is All Might's power. I just barely got to the point that I can keep it in my body without it killing me. I went way overboard with it. Izuku glared at the ground through blurry eyes, trying to gauge this distance. The only way he was surviving this fall was if he used one for all with his left arm. His own quirk wasn't gonna help him here at all. But if he used one for all again, it would destroy his left arm and he wouldn't be able to move at all. With just 1 point to his name, Izuku wouldn't be able to pass the exam. He was just 20 feet off the ground when he decided his life was worth more than the exam and curled back his fist to set one for all loose again. But just as he was about to let it rip, a hand slapped his cheek and gravity ceased to affect him. Izuku floated slowly to the ground, glancing to the side as he realized the girl who had been trapped had floated up on a piece of debris to save him. As they hovered just over the ground, the now nauseous-looking placed her fingertips against each other and groaned. Release. They hit the ground at a safe distance, at which point the girl began to vomit and Izuku struggled to maintain his composure through the terrible pain in his broken limbs. Thanks. He started to crawl with his left arm, looking around desperately for a robot to attack even in his injured state. I gotta get more points, one won't cut it. Time's up. Present Mike's voice rang through his eardrums and once he realized what the pro had said, despair settled into Izuku's stomach. He let his head fall to the ground and gave up to the darkness taking over his vision, knowing that all his effort had been utterly wasted. Several of the other examinees walked over, but kept a wary distance from him. They couldn't believe the devastation he'd caused with just one punch. Destroying a robot of the zero-pointer's size with only one blow was crazy. Sheesh, what the hell was that? He sent that huge thing flying with just one shot. But he was so timid before the test started. How the heck does a guy with a quirk like that end up being such a scaredy cat? The teen with the glasses was watching from further away as the school nurse, recovery girl, came up to take care of the injured boy. He was frowning deeply. They're all missing the point. He jumped in to save that girl. Even though he was lacking in points, he acted to protect her from that huge robot. If this hadn't been an exam, of course, I would have done the same thing. Wait a minute. Could that have been a part of the test? He watched as recovery girl used her quirk to heal Izuku's broken body, thinking hard about the exam. An epiphany struck him as he considered all the factors and realized what he was missing. I see. If the test is designed like that, then this kid. A week later and Izuku was still a ball of nerves trying to get over the pit in his stomach. He'd recovered from his broken limbs, but his failure at the exam still hurt. Even at dinner, he stared at the fish on his plate for so long that his mother started to freak out a little. He ate a little, but he just didn't have much of an appetite. As he sat on the couch that evening, curling a dumbbell in one hand half-consciously. Day after day, he had replayed the test in his head. If I had to guess, I think I did pretty well on the written exam, Izuku thought to himself. But with just a single point on the practical exam, that grade won't matter at all. Even All Might hasn't gotten in touch with me since then. He's probably embarrassed by how badly I screwed up after spending so much of his time to train me. God, I should just give one for all back to him. Can I do that? The results from your test should be in today or tomorrow, right? Izuku's mother, Inko, tried to start a conversation with him. She was as nervous as he was. I guess, he mumbled. Even if you don't pass, I still think it's amazing that you tried. A lot of people wouldn't have had the courage to do that, you know. Yeah, Izuku sighed. He hadn't told his mother about All Might. He'd promised the man, after all, not to say a word about his true identity to anyone. Mom probably thinks I tried to take the exam with my quirk and flunked because I can't use it. She's not totally wrong, either. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to get some of the stress out of his body with a few deep breaths. I'll just take the support course exam next week. Izuku. He jumped and spun around as Inko came running into the living room from the front door, holding a single envelope in her hands. The pit in Izuku's stomach turned into a terrible black hole as he saw the UA stamp on it. It's here, Inko exclaimed, nervousness all over her face. Her son looked absolutely despondent. Izuku took the envelope and retreated into his room, placing it on his desk. He could hear Inko pacing back and forth outside the door, and it did absolutely nothing to help his own nerves. He spent a good 15 minutes just staring at the envelope before he grabbed it harshly and ripped the thing open. Instead of a letter, a small metal disc clattered onto the desk. I am here as a projection. He yelped as a video of All Might was projected onto the wall behind his desk from the metal disc. Izuku glanced back and forth from the disc to the projection in confusion for a few seconds. What the All Might? Wait, this is from UA, right? Huh. Sorry kiddo, I had a lot of work to do so I couldn't get in touch with you. The projection of All Might took a bow. But it's all good, we'll be seeing more of each other since I'll be starting a teaching job at UA. He looked like he was about to say something else that would drop further bombshells on Izuku's already strained brain, but the hero was distracted by someone out of frame. What? Speed it up. I've gotta tell him a few things though, it's gonna push everything else back. How many more of these do I have to do again? Geez, alright, I got it. All Might cleared his throat and said the words that made every cell in Izuku's body feel like it weighed a ton. You passed the written exam with flying colors, but you only got a single point on the practical. So of course, you didn't pass, if that were all. Izuku blinked in confusion. All Might gestured to a video screen behind him. Observe, young man. A video began to play and Izuku realized that the girl who appeared in it was actually the one who had saved him from falling to death. She looked a little nervous as she approached Present Mike, whom she had called to get his attention. Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but there was a boy in my exam with curly hair and lots of freckles. He's kind of plain looking, you know. She was talking about him, Izuku realized. Would it be possible to share some of my points with him? I heard him say that he'd only gotten a single point or something, so I guess he was struggling to pass, but he got really hurt and probably lost points trying to save me from that villain. Could you please at least give him the points he lost because of me? He swallowed hard. She didn't have to do that for me, All Might paused the video and grinned at the screen. What kind of hero course would it be if we turned down people who did the right thing? This ain't some second-rate school you tested for. The exam was not based solely on villain points. The video began playing again. Present Mike lifted a hand to pat the girl on the head, grinning in amusement. No worries, Lil, Missy. You can't share points, but you won't have to. All Might stepped in front of the screen as the video ended. Laying your life on the line for other people is a huge part of being a hero. We had a special panel of judges looking for just that thing. You only got one villain point, but you scored big on the rescue points, kid. You got a grand total of 61 points. And your friend who tried to help you out, Ochako Uraraka, scored 45 points. He had to be dreaming. There was no way, no freaking way. All Might's grin got a little softer. You passed, kid. The lump in his throat made it impossible for him to say anything. Izuku covered his face with one hand as tremors racked his body. All Might held a hand out to him on the screen. Come, young man, this is your hero academia. The staff of UA were looking over the final scores for the examinees who had been accepted into the school. The scores were all displayed on a huge TV screen, giving them all a chance to assess the top students. Damn, that kid took first place without a single rescue point. One of the teachers whistled. Katsuki Bakugo, that's one tough kid. His quirk let him pick up the pace as the exam went on, another replied. He picked off the 1 and 2 pointers early on, then while the other examinees were running from the 0-pointer, he went wild and stacked up a huge amount of points. In contrast, Another member of the staff pointed at the score profile for Izuku Midoriya. That kid placed 7th with just 1 villain point. The only reason he passed at all was because he got a crazy high score on rescue points. We've had examinees take on the giant villain in the past, but it's been years since I saw someone blow it to hell like that. I was surprised. Present Mike threw a fist in the air. I couldn't help but shout, "Yeah," when I saw that wicked right. Kid earned his spot here, fair and square. But the injuries he received from the blowback of his quirk were intense, Recovery Girl mentioned. It was as though a child had just manifested their quirk for the first time. It's true insofar that he needs a lot of grooming, another hero added. But if he gets to a point where he can use that power without blowing his body up, he'll definitely become a talented hero. That punch reminded me of All Might. In the back of the room, a tired-looking man in dark clothes and a silver-gray scarf eyed Izuku's profile disdainfully. What a ruckus. Izuku ran to the beach as soon as he got a text from All Might. He didn't care if it was the middle of the night, he had to see the guy. He spotted the lanky figure waiting for him by a small pier and shouted, "All Might." The man choked up blood with a stutter. Who's that?" Izuku suddenly heard people calling towards them. "What, All Might?" The hero lowered his voice to a hiss. "Repeat after me, I had the wrong person." "Ah." Izuku waved his hands frantically at the couple standing on the pier not far off. "I had the wrong person." They made sounds of disappointment, but All Might's cover was saved, so they both sighed in relief. All Might held a hand up. "Congrats on passing." Thanks." Izuku gave him a nervous high five. "For the record, I didn't tell the Academy about the work we've done together, got it? I don't want you to think you got in because I told them to let you in. I wasn't one of the judges." Izuku nodded, smiling gratefully. "I appreciate that, but I was surprised to hear you decided to become a teacher at UA. Your office is located at Roppongi, Minato Ward in Tokyo." Getting creepy, All Might stopped him with a huff. "Anyways, I told the Academy a year ago about my predicament, but that was before I met you. I had plans for them to inform me if they ever found a worthy successor for One for All." The boy swallowed. It made sense that All Might would look for a successor from the best hero school in the world. He'd probably intended to pick one of the talents there before he'd met Izuku at all. "One for All blows up my body even if I use it just once," Izuku told him. "I can't handle it any better than I can handle my own quirk." "There's no getting around that," All Might told him. "For now, you've only just become able to hold One for All in your body. If you just suddenly sprouted a tail, you wouldn't have the foggiest idea of how to use it. Control of it will come later the more you train up your vessel." "Wait, you knew I'd wreck my body before all this?" "Well, yeah, there was just no time to get you used to it, but everything worked out All Might." The hero floundered slightly. He reached down to pick up a couple of discarded cans, which Izuku eyed with annoyance. He'd spent the last 10 months cleaning this beach and people were already leaving trash here, damn it. "Right now, you're all or nothing with One for All," All Might told him. "With time and training, you'll be able to use it in more manageable quantities until you can wield it all without a problem." He shifted into his muscle form and crushed the cans in one hand. "Like this?" Izuku nodded. That made sense. "As for your own quirk," All Might turned towards the ocean after tossing the crushed rubbish into a nearby trash can. "We haven't gotten to practice it at all since we were trying to build you up to use One for All. I saw you use it briefly during the exam, though." The boy suddenly tensed. What did the other teachers think of it? All Might set a hand on the boy's shoulder. "They know you've got a flame quirk, but since it was so briefly used, not much else. Your homeroom teacher and other members of the main staff will learn about what your quirk is, though. They're given that information so they can train you as best as possible." Izuku looked at his feet, feeling his nerves already go out of control. All Might knelt to look him in the eye. "None of them are going to judge you by your quirk, young man. They're all good, fair teachers and heroes. They'll help you learn how to turn those flames into something that can protect people." "Okay. I'm sorry, he swallowed. "I guess I haven't really considered that I'll have to use my quirk at UA. Now I'm about to actually go there and, what if I scare the other students with it? All Might squeezed his shoulder. It's true, you might. Your quirk is nearly identical to Heat Viper's, but it's been a while since he was active and so kids your age probably won't see it for what it is. If anyone does recognize it, they might be intimidated. It's unfair, but that's how it is. It's your job to show them that their fears are unwarranted. Being a hero is largely dependent on your actions. Is where you'll begin to take those actions. And don't forget, you've got one for all now. You can take both of those quirks and turn them into one that will shine more gloriously than they possibly could on their own. Izuku absorbed those words and just closed his eyes, cementing them into the forefront of his mind. He needed to make sure he didn't forget that. Hold up, is that All Might? No way, when did he get here? All Might and Izuku flinched as the couple on the pier realized who was with them. The hero stood and darted off. We're running, kid. Why yes. All Might glanced over his shoulder at the boy as they hightailed it. The flame I passed onto you is small, but in time, it'll be exposed to wind and rain and grow in strength. You will grow into an inferno to take my place as I slowly fade away. Then my duty will be done. Yeah, that's deep. Ah, that's right, All Might exclaimed. Almost forgot. I need you to meet with me again tomorrow, kid. Come by UA. Huh, sure. But what for? Izuku stared at the squared hero beside All Might with sparkling eyes. Smintos. Oh wow, I didn't know you were a teacher at UA too. Smintos' sweat dropped at the boy's enthusiasm and quietly muttered to All Might. Is he always like this? He'll get over it in a bit, All Might replied, chuckling. He's a huge fanboy, though. Anyways, Smintos offered the teen a kind smile. That's right, I'm Smintos, a teacher at UA and a pro hero. Izuku bowed politely. It's an honor to meet you. But well, what am I doing here? Here was a huge, seemingly empty building with a concrete floor. There didn't appear to be anything special about it, which was why Izuku was so puzzled. Despite the building being on UA's campus, it was rather plain. This is a facility of my own devising, TDL, Smintos explained. Better known as the Training Dream Land by the students. Using my quirk, I can prepare terrains and training objects personalized for each student. He knelt to touch the ground and as Izuku watched, a few sections of the floor rose up to create several man-sized spires of concrete. Later in the semester, your homeroom teacher will bring you and the other students out here to develop special moves with your quirks, but that's not why we're here. Izuku jumped as a small, white creature hopped onto All Might's shoulder from seemingly out of nowhere. It looked like a large mouse in a suit with a scar over its right eye, but it spoke as well as any human. The creature gave him a wave with one paw from its place on All Might's shoulder. I'm Nezu, the principal of UA. Principal, Izuku yelped, starting to panic. Wait, I'm not in trouble, am I? You're not, so settle down. All Might was quick to reassure him. You're here for a different reason. He sagged in relief as Nezu jumped to the ground and approached him. All Might explained the circumstances to us regarding your quirk. You haven't used it in several years, correct? Izuku nodded, feeling a little uncomfortable. Yes sir. Because of that, your elementary and middle school records have almost no information about your quirk, Nezu went on. But we can't have that. UA needs more information than the simple, flame quirk you're registered with. Oh, he realized what they wanted now. It made him feel small, and a pit formed in his stomach. Don't look so worried, Nezu smiled at him. No one here is going to judge you for your quirk resembling Heat Viper's. You don't have any control over that. Besides, it could be that the only thing similar about your quirks is their appearance and base form. Quirks are inherited from both parents, you know. Izuku swallowed hard. What do I have to do? We'll need you to activate your quirk first of all, Nezu explained. Then we're going to put it through a few simple tests to identify what it really does. Oh okay, Izuku stammered. Now, Nezu walked back to All Might and nodded once he got there. Now, he squeezed his eyes shut and tried his best to will the flames to gather around his body, but they weren't coming as fast as they had when he flared up against the sludge villain. All Might and the other teachers watched as small sputters of flame randomly tried to start up on his body, but they barely lasted a second before flickering away. Something wrong? Smintos asked innocently. Just give me a minute, Izuku pleaded, his eyes still shut. Nezu had crawled his way back up to All Might's shoulder. As he watched the team struggle several meters away, he began to speak quietly to the other hero. I can already tell those mental blocks he's built up are going to be a problem. Yes, All Might replied lowly. He's made himself think that if he uses his quirk in front of others, they'll reject him out of fear. But I know he can use it. A situation where his quirk is triggered by adrenaline is very different from a passive one like this, Nezu said. But perhaps we can work around that for now. He nodded to Smintos, who tapped the ground quietly. In an instant, the ground beneath Izuku's feet was pushed up several meters, causing the boy to yelp in shock. With that quick shot of adrenaline, his quirk flared up and consumed his entire body. There we go, All Might smiled apologetically. Sorry kiddo, but we figured you could use a little jump start. It's fine, Izuku stammered. He adapted himself to the heat and the sight of green flames licking his body after a few moments. Thanks. Smintos lowered him back to ground level, scratching his chin. Well, your skin is fireproof. And not really, Izuku told him, holding up one hand to watch the flames. My skin is pretty heat resistant, but I'm only fireproof to these green flames. I was messing with my mom's candles one day and got burned a little. It took a while though. All Might raised an eyebrow. What were you doing with candles? My mom puts them out every now and again to make the house smell nice, the teen said. I didn't use my quirk, but I wanted to see if I could touch regular fire somehow and well, I played with the candles for too long, I guess. All Might's sweat dropped. Somehow, he could definitely see Izuku doing that. Speaking of outside sources of fire, Nezu pressed a button on a data pad he had extracted from his pocket and after a moment, a section of the floor opened up like a sliding door and revealed what looked like an oversized Bunsen burner. All Might said you could manipulate other flames from the sludge villain incident. I'd like you to demonstrate that, please. The burner lit up, prompting Izuku to turn towards it. He held his hand out, narrowing his eyes in concentration. He was willing the flames to come to him, and they did after a few moments. The flames rushed towards him as though he were a magnet, quickly reaching the teen and his own green fire. The moment the outside flames touched the green fire, the latter began to consume the former at a rapid pace. Izuku was careful to make sure the flames didn't get too close to him until his own fire had completely transmuted them into the familiar green flames. Nezu watched with a thoughtful look, typing notes on his data pad all the while. I see, so your quirk attracts and changes outside sources of fire into green flames. How's your control? Izuku waved one hand to the side and the flames followed. He could bring them in closer and push them away, but the farther away they got, the harder it was for him to control them. They completely fizzled out once they got to a certain distance. It's not bad. I feel like it's kind of rough since I never use it, but I can make them do what I want as long as they're close enough. Looks like 10 meters is your limit for now, Nezu agreed. You can work on improving that once school starts. Can you extinguish them? Izuku focused for a second, willing most of the flames to dissipate, but not all of them. He made sure to keep the flames around his body. He wasn't sure he could get them going again if he cut them off completely. All Might nodded. You've got pretty decent control over them, even if it's obvious you haven't used your quirk in a while. How much flame can you produce on your own? Nezu asked. Without external sources. Izuku frowned and tried to generate as much flame as he could, but it did little more than create a slightly larger cloak of flame around him. After nearly a minute of straining himself, he had to sit down to catch his breath. That's it, I can't make any more on my own. In other words, you need to be close to an external source of flame to take full advantage of your quirk, huh? Smintos said thoughtfully. It's actually somewhat similar to my own quirk. Nezu finished typing on the data pad and leapt down. All done. You're fine to cut the power there, young man. Izuku gladly let the flames vanish totally. He was starting to feel a little too warm for his liking and he was getting kind of thirsty. How'd I do? Perfectly well, Nezu assured him. I'll add this data to UA's private profile on you. It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Midoriya. Enjoy your last few weeks on break, we'll be seeing you again in spring. Nezu and Smentos took off then, leaving Izuku with All Might. All Might walked over and offered a hand to Izuku, pulling him back to his feet. You did great. Thanks, Izuku mumbled, feeling slightly flushed. I'm still nervous, though. If you got over your fear in a day, I'd be very surprised, All Might told him. He set a hand on the boy's shoulder. Give it time. But you saw today that there are people here who see your quirk as your own, right? They don't see your quirk and immediately think of Viper's. They see your quirk as your own unique trait, which it is. Viper's flame quirk was similar, but he couldn't attract flames like you can. That's from your mother's quirk, right there. That brought a slight smile to Izuku's face. I guess you're right. I understand if you're still uncomfortable showing your quirk in front of others, but make sure you're prepared to use it, All Might warned him. UA isn't going to be a walk in the park. You'll be pushed beyond your limits each and every day. Your first test is going to be conquering your fear. Remember this, young man. To be a hero is to help others. But you'll only be able to help others if you can help yourself, as well. A few weeks later and it was springtime for classes at UA to start. Izuku was rushing to make sure he had everything even though he'd packed and repacked it all twice the night before and once already this morning. His mom was as flustered as he was. You've got tissues. Yes. And your handkerchief. Yes. The non-flammable one, right? Yes. He yelped, stuffing his feet into his shoes. I gotta go. Izuku. Wait. Inko called. He stopped with the door half open, impatient and nervous. What? Inko offered him a cheery smile. I'm so proud of you, okay. You're really cool. Her words brought a warm grin unbidden to his lips. I'm off. Getting to UA was the easy bit, but Izuku couldn't believe how big the insides of the building were. He was racing through the hallway to find his classroom. 1A, he panted. Where the heck is it? He finally found the door, which was enormous to say the least. He had to actually lean his head back all the way to see the top. Holy crap, I guess it's for people with gigantification quirks. His hand hesitantly reached for the door handle. Only 36 kids passed the exam to get into the hero course, plus 4 students who got in on recommendations, 20 kids in classes 1A and 1B. These guys are the best of the best to become heroes. He opened the door meekly, peering in, and was immediately given a sense of déjà vu. Katsuki was sitting in a chair with his feet propped up on the desk while the guy who had called Izuku out during the exam was arguing with him. Izuku's sweat dropped. Oh boy. Remove your feet from the desk this instant. Glasses guy ordered Katsuki. That's disrespectful towards our upperclassmen and the school. Katsuki sneered at him. Are you actually serious? Did your middle school put a stick up your ass, or were you born that way? The other teen held his hands up stiffly, not unlike a robot. My name is Tenya Iida. I come from Sume Private School. Sume. Katsuki scowled. You're a damn elite, then. Just another reason to blow your ass up. Blow me up. Are you really aiming to be a hero? Tenya demanded, recoiling from Katsuki. At this point, both boys noticed Izuku hovering by the door nervously. Tenya immediately approached him, much to Izuku's discomfort. Greetings. My name is. I overheard you. Izuku stammered to interrupt him. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you. Izuku, I must acknowledge you for discerning the true nature of the practical exam. Tenya declared. I completely misread you. I hate to admit it, but you surpassed me during the test. He wasn't even sure how to tell the guy that he hadn't had the foggiest idea about it either, but thankfully he caught Katsuki's eye and waved hesitantly. Oh, hey, Katsuki. Katsuki huffed. Good, you finally got here. I was gonna blow you up if you didn't. You mean on the Xbox, right? Izuku laughed nervously. Ah, it's you. The curly-haired guy. Izuku jumped and spun around only to blush furiously when he realized the same girl from the exam Ochako, wasn't it, had appeared behind him at the door. She smiled widely at him and he couldn't help but notice that the school uniform looked really good on her and he was blushing even more now, damn it. You made it in, after all. She exclaimed. Just like Present Mike said. Awesome. By the way, that punch of yours was crazy. You blew that big robot up with one shot. And no, it was 'cause why you spoke on my behalf, and how do you know about that? I mean. Katsuki frowned in confusion as he heard the conversation go on. He blew a robot up with a punch. What, did he use his quirk to light the thing up? Ochako was still enthusiastically talking to Izuku, who looked like he might pass out from all the blood rushing to his face. Katsuki snorted. The guy was freaking out over a girl getting so close to him it was hilarious. I wonder if today's the ceremony or if we're gonna meet with counselors or something. Do you know what our teacher is like? I'm really excited about it. If you're here to have fun, do me a favor and leave now. Ochako stopped talking and Izuku paled as he looked at the floor behind her. She turned and her face twisted a little as she noticed the really creepy face poking out of a big yellow sleeping bag. The man inside looked like he hadn't slept for a year and forgot how to shave cleanly. The man's voice was low and tired sounding. This is the hero course. Get your act together. He pulled out a juice pouch and ate it down in one go. Izuku gulped. What the hell is that? The man crawled out of his sleeping bag and walked to stand in front of the rest of the class. It took you lot 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is limited. You kids aren't rational enough. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleasure meeting you. This guy is our homeroom teacher. Izuku stared at the man in disbelief. That means he's a pro hero, but I've never heard of him, and I've never seen a hero who looks so worn down. Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a bunch of blue and white track uniforms. This is sudden, but put these on and go to the PE grounds. Toshinori Yagi, more commonly known as All Might, was sitting in his new office at UA going through paperwork and a mountain of files on the new classes. Most specifically, he was focusing on the information about Class 1A, where Izuku had been assigned. He was already feeling concerned that the boy might be unprepared for the early trials of the school. UA's teaching system is very different from others, he thought to himself. Depending on the homeroom teacher he's assigned, even the first day can be unforgiving. He felt a headache coming on as he found the file on the class's teacher. He didn't even need to see the picture, just the guy's hero name, Eraserhead. Oh great, he got Aizawa. The man in question was notorious for expelling students he felt had no potential. If the file was accurate, which Toshinori knew for a fact it was, Aizawa had expelled 154 students during his time at UA. He's in for a rough day, Toshinori sighed. A quirk assessment test. Aizawa nodded. Yup. Get ready. Wait. Ochako stammered. What about the introduction ceremony or counselor meetings? If you want to be heroes, you won't have time for things like that, Aizawa muttered, looking at them through the messy black locks covering part of his face. UA is so successful partly because of the great freedom it allows on campus. That freedom is also allowed to the teachers. What does that mean? Izuku wondered. It made him feel uneasy for some reason. You all remember the exercises you had to do in middle school, right? Aizawa asked them. The physical tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. The country still hasn't gotten around to standardizing those sort of things. It's illogical. He pulled out a tablet from his pocket and tapped on a measurement app that was linked up with the school system. Let's just get to it. Katsuki, how far could you throw a softball in middle school? Katsuki shrugged. 67 meters. Give it another go, Aizawa told him, tossing a softball at the boy casually and pointing at a circle of ground used for softball pitch. Use your quirk this time. As long as you don't leave the circle, it doesn't matter what you do. Don't hold back, though. The teen stretched his arms for a moment as he walked into the circle. He grinned maniacally for a moment. You asked for it. Die. As he threw the ball, a huge explosion erupted from Katsuki's palm, propelling the ball way farther than he would have been able to throw otherwise. Izuku's sweat dropped at the display. Die. Aizawa watched the gauge climb until the softball finally hit the ground again. Before you can think about training, you need to know your uppermost limit. That's how we form the basis of your hero training. He showed them the final score and the class was shocked to see that Katsuki had thrown the ball over 700 meters. Are you serious? A kid with spiky red hair grinned a little nervously. That's nuts. Another teen, a girl with pink skin and gleaming yellow eyes, clapped her hands together. This looks like fun. We can use our quirks all we like. Aizawa shifted slightly. It looks fun, huh? The man suddenly looked a lot more serious as he glared at them from behind those dark locks of hair covering his face. Were you planning on having a good time during these 3 years here? If that's how you feel, then let's change things up. The student who ranks last in these 8 tests will be judged as having 0 potential and be expelled immediately. Izuku blanched. Wait, seriously, that's not funny. How am I gonna get through this? Aizawa grinned, brushing his bangs up with one hand to sneer at them. In this school, teachers can use their freedom to expel students as we choose. Welcome to UA's hero course, brats. Wait a minute. A girl. Izuku assumed it was a girl by the voice, who appeared to be totally invisible save her clothing, interrupted. This is just our first day. No, even if it wasn't, that's way too unreasonable. That's the life of a hero, Aizawa replied, unfazed by the outburst. Natural disasters, big accidents, rampaging villains, these kinds of things can happen when we least expect it. The job of a hero is to reverse all that insanity and restore reason. If you were thinking that you could just have a good time out here every day, then let me burst that bubble you've got right now. From here on out, for the next 3 years, UA is going to throw more hardships at you than you could count. Don't you know the school motto? Plus ultra. Aizawa smirked. You wanna be a hero. Overcome those hardships and climb to the top of the mountain. If you fall on the way up, catch yourself with your own power. We ain't gonna hook you up with a lifeline. Now step up to the plate and show me what you've got, greenhorns. Izuku was freaking out. This is bad. This is really bad. Even if I could use it in front of everyone here, my quirk isn't useful for any of the physical tests. One for all too, I can only use it at 100% and it totally breaks my body. What do I do? Toshinori had assumed his muscle form and gone out to watch the 1A quirk assessment for himself. Aizawa was really giving them a rough time and he could see that Izuku was having the worst of it. In all the exercises thus far, there was really nothing he could do with either of the quirks he possessed. In hindsight, he knew he should have had the kid work on his own quirk during their training, but there had been barely any time at all to build him up to inherit one for all. The circumstances were very different, as well. Toshinori had been able to wield one for all right off the bat without any of the negative effects Izuku had to experience. Not to mention that personality-wise, they were total opposites from how he'd been when he first inherited the quirk. He'd been confident and bold. Izuku was nervous and timid. Your low self-esteem and the fear of your quirk causing others to reject you are making it even harder for you to behave like a normal teen, Toshinori thought. Even so, UA and I can't afford to coddle you. Sorry kid, but you've gotta figure this one out on your own. They were back to the softball throw test. After going through the 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, and continuous side jumps, Izuku was 100% sure he was well and truly screwed. The only tests after this were the long-distance run, toe touches, and upper body exercises. Neither of his quirks were going to be useful for those. It was now or never and he still had no idea how he was going to do this. It didn't help that Ochako went and scored infinity on the ball throw with her zero-gravity quirk. If I don't get a good score here, I'm gonna be expelled, he thought, panicking. I'm just gonna have to use one for all. Even if I blow my arm up, I should get a score high enough to pass. Izuku's not doing very well, is he? Tenya muttered off to the side as said teen took his place for the softball pitch. Ochako frowned. Why hasn't he used his quirk yet? He should be at the top of the board right now. Katsuki was watching Izuku with his eyes narrowed into a glare. The hell is he doing? He hasn't even tried using his quirk for the other exercises. Don't tell me he's still scared of it. Izuku gripped the ball tightly in his hand. He made up his mind. He was gonna send this thing flying with one for all, even if it blew up his arm. He'd figure out what to do for the other tests after that. He brought his arm back, letting one for all rush through his veins, and then threw the ball for all his was worth. 46 meters. Izuku blanched. What? I definitely used it just now. I erased your quirk. The teen spun towards Aizawa and felt his blood run cold. The man's hair was flowing back away from his face and the silver cloth he wore around his neck was hovering around him like snakes ready to bite. His eyes were glowing as he glared at Izuku. What were they thinking? Letting a kid like you into academy? Erased. It suddenly clicked for Izuku as he spotted yellow goggled around the man's neck, previously hidden by the silver cloth. Wait, your eraser head. Aizawa didn't confirm it, but he didn't have to. He stalked towards Izuku, still glaring at him. You were gonna blow your arm up, weren't you? I remember seeing that power from the entrance exam. You can't manage it efficiently at all. What are you going to do when you cripple yourself? Is someone going to have to save you every time you use that power? And no. Izuku yelped as the silver cloths wrapped around his arms and yanked him closer to Aizawa, who leaned in to mutter lowly. Where's your quirk? You haven't used it at all. At bare minimum, you should at least have tried using it the same way that Katsuki uses his explosions. Did you think you could just half-ass this and get by with a broken arm? Izuku gulped, looking away from him. I can't. Use it in front of everyone. No. Then get out of here, Aizawa snapped. The cloths bound around Izuku tighter and forced his head to turn so he was looking at the pro. If you can't use your quirk in front of people, then you may as well not have a quirk at all. And I know I don't have to tell you this, but a person without a quirk can't be a hero. I'm trying, Izuku protested. No one here at UA is going to coddle you, Aizawa told him roughly. If your fear is too much, you don't need to be here. Figure it out now or give up. You can't become a hero with that kind of block on your power. The cloths released him and Aizawa closed his eyes. He had to shut them for a moment since he couldn't blink while using his quirk, letting out an irritated sigh. I've returned your quirk to you. Give it your best shot. He felt like crawling into a hole to die. As if that wasn't discouraging enough. He started muttering to himself out of habit. The only way I can pass is by using one for all to shoot the ball as far as possible, but what if he grades me harder for not using my quirk? I can't flare up all the way in front of everyone, but if I don't, I might get expelled. What am I supposed to do? Aizawa watched the boy mutter to himself after getting some eye droplets into his eyes. He was curious to see what he'd do after getting shoved into a corner like this, but he was pretty sure the kid wouldn't be able to pass this hurdle. He was just way too timid and reluctant to use his quirk. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut tightly to reel in his panic. I'm just gonna have to do whatever I can for now. He brought his arm back and went through the motions to throw the ball, but it was only at the very last second that he let one for all and his quirk loose. Aizawa's eyes widened in surprise as Izuku's hand exploded with emerald fire, igniting the softball to propel it away. At the same time, one for all built up in his index finger, and at the last point of contact, Izuku let it all rip and sent it flying as far as he possibly could. Aizawa waited several seconds for the ball to hit the ground before he checked the distance. 815 meters. He didn't channel it through his whole arm and waited until the last possible second to launch the ball with that crippling strength. To top it off, he lit it up with his flames and controlled those to propel it further still. Patchy at best, but not too shabby. Mr. Aizawa. The man blinked and looked up to see Izuku clench his hand into a fist, despite his broken finger. He was biting his lip to withstand the pain, but he was still standing and certainly not crippled. I can keep going. Aizawa grinned. Good. In the wake of Izuku's impressive throw, the rest of Class 1A took a moment to admire his throw. Woo-hoo, Ochako cheered. Now that's a heroic score. Tenya blinked at the sight of Izuku clutching his right hand. His finger looks swollen. It's just like the entrance exam. What an odd quirk. A blonde kid who had been shooting a laser out of his belly button for the last few tests shrugged. It's not stylish at all. Katsuki did a spit take and choked on the water he was drinking. What the is that power? Izuku walked back to the group of students clutching at his hand, but yelped when Katsuki grabbed him by the collar and yanked him over. staring at him with a sort of perplexed fury. How the did you do that? Well, I just propelled it with my quirk. He stammered. You barely ever use your quirk. Katsuki hissed. There's no way the base power is that high. Explain what you just did and wait, what the? He'd spotted Izuku's injured finger and took several seconds to process the connection between the injury and Izuku's unbelievably good throw. When Katsuki looked back at his face, Izuku cringed at the rage in his eyes. Deku. Why yeah, he screamed as Katsuki put him in a headlock and started to mercilessly drive his knuckles into his head. You dumbass. You blew your finger up with your quirk. You're supposed to be smart, goddammit. Don't try and outdo me if you yourself up. I'm so sorry, Izuku cried, trying to escape the inescapable grip of his best friend to no avail. Most of the class sweat dropped at the display. What even? Asked the pink-skinned girl. I think he's concerned for his friend, the red-headed boy suggested hesitantly. Katsuki grew even more ruthless after Izuku tried to escape him. I think. Sheesh. Talk about tough love, said another boy with round elbows. Aizawa snorted and glanced at the time. They had a few more tests to complete, so there was no time for dilly-dallying. Come on, let's get moving. We're not done yet. The next 2 tests flew by, although Izuku had trouble with them due to the pain of his broken finger and so didn't get another score that was especially high. When all was said and done, they gathered at the starting point with Mr. Aizawa, who was going through all the records with the same, bored expression he'd had all class. So, a blonde kid with black highlights similar to lightning bolts tapped the ground with his foot awkwardly. What's the verdict? Aizawa glanced up at him. The lowest score gets expelled, right? The guy looked a little nervous. Who's having a bad day? Oh, I lied. Izuku blinked. Aizawa's shit-eating grin was the visual definition of a god-tier troll. That was a logical ruse to bring out the best of your quirks. About 80% of the class screamed. What? One of the girls raised an eyebrow at the shocked expressions on her classmates' faces. That should have been obvious. Of course it was a lie. Aizawa ignored the mental devastation he'd left in his wake and started to walk off. That's it. The papers for your curriculums are back in the classroom. Go give 'em a read. Oh, and Izuku. Izuku was still trying to process that he wasn't getting expelled and robotically accepted the slip of paper Aizawa gave him. Go get yourself patched up by Recovery Girl. And be prepared for tomorrow's ordeal. Yes, sir, he replied absently. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Izuku. Visiting Recovery Girl had gotten his finger healed in no time, but her quirk merely accelerated the body's healing process. It required energy, so even though he was fine now, his body was low on fuel. He was rubbing his eyes by the time he and Katsuki started walking home for the station. I'm sleepy. Wake up, Katsuki muttered. I ain't carrying your ass home. Oh, is your finger healed? Izuku stood ramrod stiff when the foreign hand placed itself on his shoulder, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized the person to whom it belonged. Oh, Tenya, why yeah, I'm fine thanks to Recovery Girl. That's good. Tenya nodded robotically. Katsuki rolled his eyes in exasperation. It's because this dumbass blew his finger up in the first place. Tenya fell in beside Izuku on the opposite side of Katsuki and held his chin in thought. I have to say, Mr. Aizawa surprised me. I never would have expected a teacher to encourage someone with deception. Izuku nodded silently. Tenya seemed a little scary before, but I guess he's just really diligent. He's not bad once you get past the intimidating part. Hey, the trio stopped and turned at the sound of their classmate's voice. Ochako was rushing towards them from the school, prompting Izuku to start blushing out of habit. Are you guys heading to the station? Wait up. Katsuki stared at her. Round face. Round. Ochako stopped dead and stared at him incredulously. You're the Infinity Girl, Tenya said after a moment. Ochako recovered from her shock at Katsuki's comment and nodded, smiling brightly. I'm Ochako Uraraka. You're Tenya Iida. Katsuki Bakago. And Deku Midoriya, right? Deku. Bakago. Yeah, earlier you called him Deku, right? She pointed at Katsuki, who still looked outraged and baffled. The blonde teen huffed angrily. I call him that 'cause he can't do anything with his quirk. Also, it's Bakugo. My real name is Izuku, Deku, corrected her timidly. Tenya chopped a hand towards him. So it's an insult. Oh, gosh, Ochako put a hand behind her head in embarrassment. I'm sorry, but you know, Deku kinda reminds of the word for, don't give up, so I kinda like it. I'm Deku. Katsuki choked on his own saliva from witnessing the hilariously red face the green-haired teen was sporting. What the is that weird look? Izuku, you accepted that too easily. Tenya admonished. Izuku covered his blazing face. It's like a Copernican revolution. What? Ochako asked, confused. Katsuki scoffed and started walking again. I can't stand this. Hurry it up, scrubs. We're gonna be late. Is that a derogatory reference? No mystery who asked that question. The group of teens walked together to the station, although Katsuki didn't say anything more than a few choice curse words. It was nice, albeit a little awkward, but Izuku thought to himself that he could definitely get used to it. Day 2 came around with a much more easygoing start. Since Mr. Aizawa wasn't trying to con them with another logical ruse, homeroom wasn't nearly as dreadful for Izuku. It was still slightly nerve-wracking, but for a different reason. Introduce yourselves to your classmates, Aizawa told them, still wrapped up in his yellow sleeping bag. Since you'll be working with each other for the next 3 years, you need to get to know each other. The logical way to do that is as early as possible. You'll come up here one after another and state your name, what your quirk is, and something else about yourself. I don't care what it is. Sir. Tenya held his hand up with lightning speed. How should we proceed with the order of students? I don't care, Aizawa deadpanned. I'm going to sleep. Handle it yourselves. So while the pro took a nap, Tenya more or less organized the class introductions himself. They ended up going from the front row to the back row in a right-to-left formation. First up was the girl who was only known to be a girl by her outfit. The rest of her body was totally invisible. Literally. She was completely see-through. Hey, this is kinda embarrassing with everyone looking at me, but whatever. Hi, I'm Toru Hagakuri. My quirk is called transparency, and it's kinda obvious what it does, right? Something else about me, I like plushies and other cute stuff. Next was a huge guy with a mask over his mouth and 6 arms. I'm Mezzo Shoji. My quirk is dupli arms. I can create replicas of my body parts on my tentacles, like my mouth, ears, and eyes. I've never really had any worldly desires, so I guess that's it. I'm Mashirao Ojiro, said the next student, a blonde guy with a long and powerful tail. My quirk is just my tail. It's more or less a third arm, but it helps me maintain my balance. Something about me, I practice martial arts. The next guy was excessively glamorous. I am Yuga Aoyama, the blonde teen announced with a dramatic flourish of his hands. My quirk is the fabulous naval laser. I can shoot a laser from my belly button. But if I shoot it for more than a second, I get a tummy ache. Another stylish fact about me is that I speak French. Katsuki was up next, scowling after Yuga with an annoyed look. What's with that tool? Whatever. The name's Katsuki Bakugo. My quirk is explosion. All you need to know is that I can blow your asses up. I'm gonna be the #1 hero, so stay out of my way, extras. Izuku's sweat dropped at the irritated responses from the rest of the class after Katsuki's introduction. Yep, that's classic Katsuki. I guess he's in a good mood though, since he only cussed us out once. I don't like having to follow up after such a jerk. The next student was a girl with extended ear lobes that looked like plug-in jacks. She scowled at Katsuki, who sneered back, but ignored him otherwise. My name is Kyoka Jiro. My quirk is called Earphone Jack. I can insert them into objects and send the sound of my heartbeat through them. I can also hear pretty well, even through really thick walls. Oh, these stretch, too. She showed them by letting one of the jacks extend until it was several feet long before she retracted it. I can play music with a few different instruments. Next up was the blonde guy with black, lightning-shaped highlights in his hair. He grinned confidently. Hey, I'm Denki Kaminari. My quirk is electrification. I can let loose a bunch of electricity from my body and shock people by touching them. I kinda short circuit if I go over my wattage limit, though. I like reading manga and comics. My turn, exclaimed the pink-skinned girl, who bounced to the front of the class. Izuku also noticed that she had a pair of small, yellow horns atop her head. In addition, the sclera of her eyes was black, making her gold irises pop out. I'm Mina Ashido and my quirk is acid. It lets me secrete corrosive acid from my skin, which is why I got this hot purple-pink tone to me. I can control its solubility and viscosity, but I like using it to surf on whatever I want. If I use it for too long, I start losing my own resistance to it. I like to break dance but I don't like bullies. I'm looking at you, Katsuki. Katsuki threw a perfect middle finger in her direction. Off. It was Izuku's turn next. He nervously walked to the front and hesitantly smiled a little. Hi. I'm Izuku M. Midoriya, my quirk, it's. He was silent for a few seconds, trying to get the nerve to tell everyone what his quirk was. Katsuki got impatient and scowled. Do I need to come up and hold your hand or something? Just tell them, damn it. Don't rush him, Katsuki. Mina shot him a warning look. We've got plenty of time. Shut it. Izuku didn't want them to start arguing, so he got it out as quickly as possible. My quirk is called All Flare. Katsuki and Mina, who had been glaring daggers at each other, stopped and looked back at Izuku as he reclaimed everyone's attention. The green-haired boy looked at the floor, still feeling jittery in every cell of his body. I can emit green fire from my body, not much, though. I have to get fire from an outside source, or I'm limited to that. My green fire changes regular fire to the kind I can use. I'm a little heat resistant, but flames that aren't mine can still burn me after a bit. If I concentrate them in one place, they can create an explosive force. That's pretty much it. You gonna tell us something about yourself? Kyoka prompted, lazily swinging one of her jacks around her finger. He stiffened and nodded jerkily. Izuku had completely forgotten that part. I play video games. Competitively. Sometimes. Izuku all but ran back to his seat, trying to hide his burning face from the eyes of his classmates. For an introvert like himself, that was a nerve-wracking experience. The next guy was a teen with rounded elbows. Well, I'm Hantashiro. My quirk is tape. I can shoot this material that's kind of like tape from my elbows. It's a lot stronger than regular tape, though. It can support my body weight pretty easily. If I use it too much, my skin dries out. I play video games too. He grinned at Izuku in an attempt to help him relax a bit. We gotta hang out sometime. Izuku managed to smile and nod his head. He appreciated Hanta's effort. It did make him feel a bit calmer. I'm Eijiro Kirishima, declared the next boy, who bore a shock of spiky red hair atop his head. He flexed one of his arms and the skin on his hand became much tougher looking. My quirk is called hardening. My skin just hardens, but I can punch through solid concrete. I'm a huge fan of the hero Crimson Riot. I guess I'm next. The next person was a girl with long teal hair tied in a huge bow. She had large eyes, hands, and a rather wide mouth. I'm Suyu Asui. My quirk is called frog form. I can do a lot of frog-like things. I can jump really far, climb walls, swim fast, my tongue can extend for several meters, and I can secrete a mild toxin. Maybe because of my quirk, I'm pretty sensitive to cold. If I cool off too much, I get sleepy. Something about me is that I always say what's on my mind. Following Suyu was a really short guy with purple, sphere-shaped hair. I'm Minoru Mineta. My quirk is called Pop Off. I can pluck the spheres off my head and make them stick to things. They don't stick to me, though. Depending on how I'm feeling, they can stick to something for an entire day. If I take too many off, my head starts to bleed a little. Something about me. A lecherous grin made its way across his face. I love girls. Girl heroes especially. Some of the costumes are super Y. Most of the students found that distinctly uncomfortable. They responded with many boos and Tenya robotically swinging his arm at the other team to reprimand him. Unbeknownst to the rest of the class, Katsuki and Izuku stared at the unashamed pervert with intense eyes. Since Katsuki was seated in front of Izuku, he leaned back to whisper to the other teen. "The grape is a pal," Katsuki muttered, not taking his eyes off of Minoru. "Roger that," Izuku muttered back, scribbling something in his notebook. Up next was a teen with the head of a bird, which was covered in black feathers and bore a yellow beak. "I'm Fumikage Tokiyami. My quirk is Dark Shadow. There's a shadow-like monster living in my body that I can materialize from wherever I want like an extension. I don't have much to say about myself. That's kind of pointless, I think." The next student was a teenage boy who was even more shy than Izuku. He didn't actually say anything, which was kind of surprising since he looked pretty tough with a thick, square jaw and muscular build, but instead hurriedly wrote on a little whiteboard he'd brought up to the front with him. Some of the students had to lean forward and squint to read it. "Koji Koda. My quirk is animal voice. I can talk to animals and influence them to do what I ask. I like animals." Mina threw a big thumbs up in the nervous boy's direction. "Don't sweat it, Koji. That's really cool." Although he smiled a little at that, he hurried back to his desk. "Hello, fellow students." Robotically, Tenya made his way to the front and waved at them stiffly. "I am Tenya Iida. My quirk is engine. My legs have powerful engines in them, allowing me to shift up several gears to increase my speed. They're very similar to real engines. My older brother is the turbo hero, Ingenium. He is my inspiration to be a hero." Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. He had wondered why Tenya looked a little familiar, but he hadn't expected him to be related to a hero like Ingenium. The hero in question was a popular, rising star who did things by the book and had already amassed a large office with many sidekicks despite being so young. If Tenya was anything like his older brother, he was already on the road to becoming a great hero. They were finally on the last row of students, just 4 left. "Hello." The first teen from the final row, an attractive girl with long, black hair tied in a ponytail, smiled at the class. "My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. My quirk is called Creation. I can produce objects from any exposed part of my body. I can create virtually anything, except for living things, of course. All I need is to understand the object's atomic configuration in a little time. I enjoy reading and drinking tea in my spare time." The next student was a teenage boy with white and red hair divided evenly down the middle. On the left side of his face, covering his eye, was a serious-looking burn scar. In addition, his eyes were heterochromatic. The left was icy blue and the right was stormy gray. He spoke quietly. "I'm Shoto Todoroki. My quirk is half hot, half cold. I can generate ice from my right side and fire from my left, but I won't use my left side in battle. I like snow cones." Second to last was another guy with short, spiky brown hair and rather full lips. "My name is Rikido Sato. My quirk is called Sugar Rush. If I ingest 10 grams of sugar, my strength gets multiplied 5-fold for 3 minutes. For every 10 grams of sugar after that, my strength doesn't rise, but the time I stay strong extends an extra 3 minutes. But if I try to use it for too long, my body gets really tired and shuts down for a bit. Something interesting about me is that I like to bake desserts, especially cake." Last but certainly not least was a cheerful, yet somewhat shy familiar face. "Hi, I'm Ochako Uraraka. My quirk is zero gravity. If I touch an object, it loses its gravitational pull and starts to float. For now, I can make objects up to 3 tons weightless. If I use it for a while, I start to get kinda sick. If I had to pick something to say about myself, I'd say it's that the little pads on my fingertips that I use for my quirk are like a cat's paws." As soon as she was finished, Tenya stood up and walked over to Mr. Aizawa. "Sir, we've completed all the introductions." Aizawa didn't even open one of his eyes. "Okay, just review your curriculums and don't be late to your next class." "Yes, sir," Tenya replied instantly. Most of the class sweat dropped at his seriousness. Following homeroom, the first half of the day consisted of general studies that all students were required to take: English, math, science, etc. That was pretty boring in comparison to their other lessons, which took place after lunch at noon. Their foundational hero studies. Frankly, That was what every student looked forward to the most. Especially because of the teacher in charge of that class. IAM. Izuku and the rest of Class 1A whipped their heads towards the door, which flew open to reveal the infamous figure of the number 1 hero, All Might. Coming through the door like a normal person. Whoa, it's really All Might. He's wearing a costume from the Silver Age. The design is super retro. All Might took his place at the front of the class. This is Foundational Hero Studies. In this class, we'll be building up your foundations as heroes through countless trials. For your first trial, we'll start with this. Combat training. Katsuki grinned like a madman. Yes. And for your first battles, All Might pulled out a remote and pointed it at the far wall before pressing a button, causing several sections of the wall to slide out. Inside were cases with each of the students' seat numbers displayed on them. We've got the gear from your costume orders that you requested to match your quirks. Get changed and gather up at Ground Beta. All Might was waiting for them, smiling as widely as ever as the young heroes in training arrived one by one at Ground Beta. They say the clothes make the hero, ladies and gentlemen. Remember this, from now on, you're all heroes. Before long, they'd all gathered up. All Might's grin widened. I'm loving everyone's styles. Very cool. Izuku had been the last to arrive and was still catching his breath, but he looked himself over now that he was outside. His costume was a green and white jumpsuit, one his mother had provided him as a present for making it into UA. Atop his head, the fabric was stretched into 2 horn-like features which were quite similar to All Might's hairstyle. He wore white gloves, elbow and knee braces, and a red utility belt. He also had a mask that covered his face with a wire mesh at the front so it was easy to breathe. His whole costume was fireproof, a necessary feature because of his given quirk. Despite him wearing the mask, Ochako recognized him immediately and bounced over with a smile. Hey, nice costume Deku. It's real down to earth. I like it. Izuku blushed furiously upon seeing Ochako's costume, which was a black and white skin-tight bodysuit. She had large, knee-high white shoes and a clear visor covering her face, not unlike an astronaut's. The girl rubbed the back of her head nervously. I guess I wasn't clear enough when I turned in my costume design. They gave me a skin-tight bodysuit, it's kind of embarrassing. Minoru was ogling her not far away and lecherously grinned as he muttered to himself. The hero course is the best. Izuku noticed what the guy was up to and mentally tallied against him. All Might slightly raised one eyebrow as he took in Izuku's costume, specifically the horn-like structures atop his head that resembled his own hair and the white section of his mask that looked like All Might's own wide grin. The pro had to stop himself from laughing and covered his mouth with one hand. So obvious. Ha ha ha. Sir. One of the students wearing white armor raised his hand. Izuku recognized the voice instantly as Tenya's. Will we be using the same mock city from the entrance exam for this training? All Might grinned again. To a point. This will be indoor battle training. A lot of villain cleanup is seen in the open, but statistically, the better part of it is an indoor job. The smartest villains tend to commit their crimes out of sight from others. Kidnappings, break-ins, the black market, a lot of that goes on in the shadows. For this test, you'll be separated into 2-man teams of hero and villain groups, then duke it out in 2-on-2 combat. How do we determine who wins or loses? Queried Momo. Can I just blow them all away? Katsuki demanded. We won't get expelled like Mr. Aizawa said, right? Ochako wondered nervously. How should we choose teams? Tenya questioned. Isn't this cape fantastic? Yuga asked. All Might was momentarily overwhelmed by the questions, but just grinned and bore it. I will answer all of your questions. He pulled out a small sheet of paper which Izuku realized after a moment of disbelief was a script. Listen up. The scenario for this training is that a pair of villains have a nuclear weapon somewhere in the building. The hero team must infiltrate the building and stop their nefarious plans before it's too late. If the heroes capture the villains or the weapon, they win. If the villains keep the heroes away from the weapon until time is up or they capture the heroes, they win. As for your teams, they'll be chosen by lottery. Tenya seemed shocked. Wait, by lottery? Izuku understood. Pro heroes often have to create makeshift teams with other heroes that they aren't familiar with. There's no way you can prepare for unexpected situations, after all. I see, Tenya exclaimed. I apologize. All Might nodded. Anyways, here we go. These are the teams. He pulled out 2 slips of paper at a time and announced the teams one after another. A team, Ochako and Izuku. B team, Mezzo and Shoto. C team, Momo and Minoru. D team, Denki and Tenya. E team, Mina and Yuga. F team, Koji and Rikido. G team, Kyoka and Katsuki. H team, Tsuyu and Fumikage. I team, Toru and Mashirao. J team, Eijiro and Honta. Ochako smiled widely with delight. What are the odds? This is great though, we'll make an awesome team. Izuku was positive he was going to pass out from excessive blood rushing to his face by the time the day ended. Are you serious? Really? What are the odds? All Might then produced a pair of boxes, which were labeled as hero and villain, respectively. He reached into the opening at the top and pulled out a pair of balls with a letter on each one. Letters A and D. D team will be the heroes. A team will be the villains. He was playing the bad guy, Izuku realized. He really hoped the irony in that was just terrible luck on his part. All Might crossed his arms. The villains will start inside the building. You'll each have 5 minutes to come up with a strategy, then the heroes will be able to enter the building as well. The rest of the class and myself will observe through surveillance cameras. Since this is practice training, feel free to fight it out without fear of injury. Of course, if things get too extreme, I'll cut the exercise short, but other than that, no worries. Give it your best shot. Ochako whistled at the huge, rocket-shaped weapon they were supposed to protect. Wow, that looks pretty realistic. So, how should we do this? She sweat dropped at the sight of Izuku intensely muttering to himself under his breath. Tenya's quirk is going to give them an edge in mobility, so we should definitely immobilize him first, but we also have to watch out for Denki's electrical quirk because it can probably do a lot of damage in a short burst, so finding a way to counter his shock attacks is important, ideally something made of rubber or another material that blocks electricity. Earth to Deku. Ochako tapped his shoulder, causing the boy to jump and spin around. Wah, sorry, he yelped. It's okay, she giggled. So did you come up with a plan? Izuku glanced around the square-shaped room, which had a few large, steel crates, but not much more than that. The room was surrounded by windows and there were only 2 doors that led inside, one directly across from the weapon, and another on the opposite end. If they came through that, they'd have to loop around to reach the weapon. Izuku crossed his arms and tapped his fingers against his elbow in thought. I've got something in mind, he said at last. He wasn't stuttering now and his eyes gained a steady edge to them, surprising Ochako for a second. It was almost as though she was looking at a completely different person. We'll need your quirk to make it happen. Ochako smiled. This new, confident Izuku was definitely someone she'd tag as a good partner in a situation like this. I'm all ears. Tenya and Denki were both surprised and slightly nervous that they hadn't encountered either Izuku or Ochako already. They'd searched the bottom 4 floors and were now approaching the top, where they suspected the weapon was being held at this point. However, upon opening the primary door that led to the top floor, they found that it was completely blocked by 2 large, metal crates, one stacked on top of the other. They closed that door and doubled back to get to the second access point, hoping that it wouldn't be blocked off as well. Surprisingly, it wasn't. Denki grinned. They forgot about the other door. Tenya glanced cautiously as they entered the 5th floor. Something about this wasn't sitting right with him. It was too easy. They were running low on time, though. Just 5 minutes left out of the 10 minutes they'd started with. They walked around through the 5th floor and, eventually, found Izuku and Ochako standing in front of the weapon. The weapon itself was blocked off by stacks of metal boxes. The only access point to it was from the front, which Izuku and Ochako were guarding. Floating in front of them were 3 more metal boxes, 2 of which Izuku had his hands on. Green flames from his hands licked at the steel, creating a visible heat haze. Honestly, it looked like a couple of kids had taken the cushions out of a mattress and made a play fort, but Tenya was certain there was more to it than that. Ochako was focusing on keeping the 3 boxes floating with her quirk, but Izuku had an unnervingly calm look in his eyes. He was up to something. The rest of Class 1A and All Might were watching the confrontation from the surveillance room. Eijiro raised an eyebrow at the defense Izuku and Ochako had constructed. That's not gonna last very long. All they gotta do is tip him over or just run right past those two to reach the weapon. Denki should just electrocute them, Minoru added. His face took on a perverted grin. I hope his electric attacks burn off Ochako's costume. That'd be sweet. While several of the class glared at the teen in disgust, Katsuki's brow twitched and made a mental tally in his head. He was more focused on the fight, though, specifically Izuku. The way he was staring at Tenya and Denki. Deku wins, Katsuki said. Now, All Might held up a finger at the class. We can't be certain of anything yet. Since they're pretty unfamiliar with each other's quirks, it's a matter of how they can handle the situation as it develops. Nah, Katsuki shook his head, surprising All Might and the others with the certain calm in his tone. Deku already won. Sonic the Hedgehog and Sparky are Ed. Kyoka raised an eyebrow, disbelievingly. How do you know that? He's got that look in his eyes, Katsuku snapped, like it should have been obvious. It means he's got a plan. You sound awfully certain of that, Momo said slowly, trying to understand why Katsuki was so positive of the outcome. But if I'm honest, Izuku's quirk doesn't really seem fit to this kind of situation. A highly destructive force that damages his own body is hardly effective here. Katsuki suddenly fished out a small notebook from one of his pockets and opened it up, flipping through the pages. All Might's sweat dropped at the sight. Katsuki, isn't that Izuku's? Did you steal that from him? I borrowed it and I'll give it back later, Katsuku grumbled. Hey, there they go. Honta exclaimed. Denki had made the first move. Well, since they're both lined up nicely like that, he grinned, letting electricity spark from his hand. Stand back, Tenya. He leapt in front of his partner and let loose a huge bolt of electricity at Izuku and Ochako. As the bolt got closer, Izuku quickly moved the 2 floating boxes he had in his hands together as a shield. Denki only grinned at the sight. Electricity still runs through metal, you know. Except it didn't. Right before the lightning should have struck the metal crates, it fizzled out into nothing. Denki's jaw dropped. What? Izuku lowered one of the boxes to look back at their opponents, a wide grin on his face. In the surveillance room, Eijiro was just as dumbfounded. What just happened? They should have gotten blasted by that shock, Mina said, confusion clear in her voice. Momo stared at the floating metal boxes, which Izuku had in his grasp to keep them in place, and realized that they were glowing cherry red. Her eyes widened. Heat. He made a heat shield with his quirk. A what? Kyoka asked. A heat shield, she exclaimed. It's something I've read about in a physics book. If an object is heated up to a certain point, the heat can block electrical outputs that try to reach it. With that, an electric attack will just fizzle out. Honta stared at her, then glanced at the screen, where Denki was trying again and again to shock the villain team, but to no avail. Are you serious? Who even thinks of that? Deku does, idiots, Katsuki snapped. He stopped flipping through the notebook and practically shoved the object towards Momo. Look at that. She took the offered book and blinked at the rough sketch of Tenya, or rather, a rough sketch of his quirk and some rather advanced notes regarding it. Theories on how the quirk worked in and out of combat, his own observations, the information Tenya had told them during their introductions, and much more were written all along 3 or 4 pages in great detail. Deku's got this annoying habit of making lots of notes about pros and their quirks, Katsuki told them. He's good at taking a quirk and breaking it down. He thinks of stuff most people wouldn't even consider. It's true that these are some really in-depth notes, Momo replied. He's gone into a lot of detail for a quirk he barely knows about, but given enough time, I'm sure most people in the class could do the same. The difference is the time it takes, the other teen muttered. How long do you think it took him to make those notes? Well, she frowned. With this much detail and given all the unknown factors, I'd say at least an hour. It would take a while for anyone in this situation. It's the opposite. Katsuki had his arms crossed. He almost looked uncomfortable. He got all of that down in less than 10 minutes. Momo's eyes grew large. 10. With the limited information we had. He made an analysis like this in that short amount of time. Deku's always been a huge nerd when it comes to quirks, but because of that, he's stupidly fast when it comes to analyzing them, Katsuki said. Strengths, weaknesses, environmental factors, combat responses, bolsters, counters, and even other things you wouldn't normally think about. He'll just start casually making plans on how to deal with a quirk in a combat situation. It's never just one plan either. He'll throw in like 3 or 4 extras just for good measure in case the others fall through. I've watched this guy take a villain's quirk he's never seen before on TV and break it down faster than the pros who were trying to deal with him. Most of the class was listening intently at this point, their eyes wide as they watched Izuku effortlessly counter Denki's attacks. The electrification quirk user was rapidly running out of juice and the villain team had barely moved. Tenya was trying to figure out how to deal with the situation it seemed, but it was difficult with Denki's indiscriminate electric blasts growing more and more sloppy as time went on and his cognitive functions dropped. When you're dealing with Deku, what you really need to watch out for isn't that quirk he's got, Katsuki muttered. It's that goddamn brain of his. You gotta rush him so fast that he doesn't have time to think. If he gets enough time to analyze your quirk and come up with a counter, you're Ed. Denki had finally exceeded his wattage limit, with just a minute to spare. The blonde had a stupid grin on his face and his thumbs were stuck up in the air, like he was signaling that he was okay. We PFF'd. Ochako couldn't stop herself from laughing at the sight of his face. Tenya quickly moved Denki aside so that he could rush the villain team before time ran out. His engine roared to life as he sped towards them. I have to get to the weapon. Izuku shoved the boxes away and lunged at Tenya. Ochako, drop them. Roger, she replied, releasing the 2 superheated metal boxes. She kept the last one, which was not heated, up in the air. Tenya spun as he charged, twisting his body to kick at Izuku. Fall, villain. Much to his shock, Izuku twisted as well and intercepted the kick as though he'd done it 1,000 times. Using Tenya's own momentum, he kept twisting and smashed the now unbalanced teen face first into the floor. His armor diffused some of the impact, but it still jarred Tenya enough that he didn't notice Izuku immediately whip out the capture tape they'd been provided with. He wrapped it around Tenya's leg in an instant and placed a hand on the other teen's back to keep him down. One hero captured. Tenya is out, All Might's voice announced over the speakers. Tenya clenched his fists in frustration. How? Izuku just picked our team apart. Izuku sighed in relief. Phew, why you're really fast, Tenya, OWW. He winced in pain. The superheated metal had scorched his palms a little when he'd been using his quirk on those boxes. On top of that, Tenya's powerful kick had totally knocked the wind out of him. He didn't think his ribs were cracked, but damn that hurt. Ochako walked over to the dumbed-down Denki, who was still swinging his arms with his thumbs up and going, "We." All the while, she couldn't help but laugh, even as she tied the capture tape around his wrist. That's too funny, ha ha ha. She released the last metal box that was still floating in the air after that. Izuku had suggested that they might need it in case the first plan fell through, but it appeared that they hadn't had to use it. She was still amazed by his strategic thinking. He'd more or less predicted how the fight would go right from the start. A loud horn sounded, signaling the end of the exercise. Hero team has been captured. Villain team wins. Katsuki sneered at his stunned classmates. Told you, extras. Deku beat him like a drum. All Might couldn't help but agree despite his decision to remain unbiased. Izuku had come up with and pulled off a strategy most pros probably wouldn't have thought of. He was even more glad now that he'd picked Izuku as the successor to his power. In another life, you would have made a terrifying villain. But you're a hero, young man. You're going to go places. Once Izuku, Ochako, Tenya, and Denki arrived back at the surveillance room following their mock battle, they were swarmed by several excited members of the class. Eijiro was pumping his fists non-stop. That fight was sick. All of your quirks were so cool. It's hard to believe you came up with a strategy like that to counter Denki's electricity, Honta added. I never would have thought of using a heat shield, or whatever Momo called it. That was awesome, Mina exclaimed, bouncing to the front of the group. I had you pegged as a quiet nerd, Izuku, but holy crap. I take it back, that was a pro-class victory. The praise had him blushing furiously as he reverted back to his shy, introverted self. Suyu smiled at them. You're still a quiet nerd, but you definitely have good battle instincts. It was kind of like watching a strategy game. Ochako played a great support role, too. Ochako smiled back somewhat bashfully. Well, I didn't do much. Deku thought of that whole plan pretty much by himself. He probably would have found a way to win even on his own. No way, Izuku stammered. That plan wouldn't have worked at all without your quirk. Honestly, there's no way I could have won this without you. I can't use my quirk very well in battle yet, so I wouldn't have been able to move those boxes at all without your help. The only reason my quirk was effective at all was because you were there. I'm pretty sure that my quirk was actually the worst one suited for this. Momo nodded. He's right. Certainly, Izuku was the strategist of the team, but it's only thanks to Ochako that his plan was effective at all. Without her zero-gravity quirk, moving those heavy metal boxes efficiently would have been impossible for him. Support roles are just as important, if not more so, than lead roles. What's a plan without the capability to pull it off? It was Ochako's turn to blush from the praise, but her smile widened further. When you put it that way, I guess you're right. Thank you. All Might cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. Well, Momo already went and said pretty much what I wanted to hear from everyone now that we can analyze the battle, but that's not to say there weren't any errors on the villain team's part. For one, you forgot to block the second door to the 5th floor. Oh, we did that on purpose, Izuku replied. All Might blinked. Really? Why? Well, I knew that Tenya could move really fast with his quirk, Izuku began, holding his hand up to his chin as he began to half mutter, half explain. The door closest to us would have given him a clear line of sight to the weapon and I didn't know how fast he could go, so we blocked that one off in case he tried to sprint to us. I wanted to funnel them to the only other entrance to the 5th floor, but if we blocked them both off, they could have tried to break through either entrance and I didn't want to deal with that unknown factor, so we blocked off just one. I thought about trying to ambush them too, but since we blocked one door off, they would have expected that and it would have been really difficult to counter Denki's quirk if we took the offensive, so I thought it'd be best to wait for them and act defensively. Eijiro still looked perplexed. That makes sense, but I still don't get something. Why was Ochako making 3 boxes float if Izuku was only using 2 for that heat shield thing? That was one of my backup plans, he replied. In case Tenya had some plan to build up speed and rush us faster than I could handle, I was gonna start throwing that box and the other ones blocking off the weapon at him. The ones I heated up could have hurt him too much. Plus if we had to throw lots of those boxes, they would have started taking up space on the floor and left him with less room to speed up. We didn't end up having to use it, but I didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket. All Might was honestly surprised. He'd known Izuku was a smart kid and had the instincts of a fighter, but he hadn't expected this kind of strategic thinking from the normally timid teenager. But it was a pleasant surprise for him. It was almost as though he were listening to his old sidekick, Night Eye. That man was a thorough strategist as well. They'd gotten through many battles with almost effortless ease thanks to his brilliant mind. He would have loved to hear more of the boys' strategy, but they were on a time crunch, so he kept things moving. Well, the villain team had an impressive run, he concluded. But what about the hero team? Thoughts? What could they have done differently to emerge victorious? Momo raised her hand. The most prominent error was that Denki shouldn't have just started attacking the villains the way he did. Firing a huge electric blast at an armed weapon like that was incredibly foolish. Not to mention that with the way Izuku and Ochako were set up, it was obvious they had a plan ready. I believe Tenya recognized that since he stopped to think once the teams encountered each other, but Denki didn't give him an opportunity to think of a way around the villains' defenses. Moreover, he should have stopped attacking the moment he saw Izuku had a counter to his electric attacks. Instead, he wasted valuable time and energy trying to power through it. And by doing so, he he left his teammate with no way to strike the villains. Even given Izuku's extensive plans, had they worked as a team, it's still possible they could have found a way around those defenses. Denki responded with a stupid grin, still giving everyone the thumbs up. Kyoka and Ochako were trying and failing to keep themselves from laughing at his face. Tenya on the other hand played his part more strategically than Denki. He was cautious and approached the situation carefully, but he was, as I stated earlier, prevented from acting thanks to his partner's own rash actions. However, his last rush was too hurried and easily predictable. There was still a minute on the clock. Had he tried to plan a way to get by them while Denki was attacking, I feel he could have done a much better job during that last minute. But Izuku went and caught his kick anyway, Masharao pointed out. He was easily able to counter that. What else could Tenya have done? Actually, if he'd sped up a little more, I think he might have completely blown me away, Izuku admitted, surprising Tenya. He smiled at the other teen honestly, lightly patting his own stomach with one hand and wincing a bit. I mean it, you knocked the wind out of me with that kick. I can still feel it. If you'd sped up a little more, I might have been too stunned to react in time. Momo set her hands on her hips, looking slightly smug though not undeservingly given her thorough analysis, and nodded. Exactly. I see, Tenya murmured. He'd removed his helmet and ran his hand through his dark hair. So I reacted too quickly and rushed things. A full minute in combat is still a considerable amount of time, as well. I acted too rashly because I was concerned about running out of time. Thank you for the lesson. I shall not repeat this failure. He bowed his head rigidly, prompting Izuku to hold his hands up. Don't worry about it, Tenya, it's just the first day of combat training, after all. Katsuki glared at the other teen's palms, which were still burned from touching the superheated metal for too long. Despite his costume being fireproof, the heat had been too close and intense to prevent him from emerging completely unharmed. Deku, you gotta quit-ing up your hands. How the hell are you gonna keep playing competitively if they're all busted up? Izuku blinked and looked at his palms, wincing at the burns. They weren't bad, but they stung, and he would be lying if he said he wasn't uncomfortable. I know, I just couldn't think of another way to counter Denki's quirk. I didn't have much information about it other than that he could discharge electricity, so I came up with a way to block it the best way I could. Well, for now, get yourself to Recovery Girl, All Might instructed him, passing the boy a slip of paper to go to the nurse. Then come straight back here. Those wounds are mild, they won't take more than a few seconds for her to heal. Izuku smiled brightly. Yes, sir. He ran off then, leaving the rest of Class 1A with All Might, who reached into the hero-villain boxes once again. Now then, who are the next lucky teams? Izuku had made it back from Recovery Girl and her short lecture on overdoing things with his quirk in time to catch the end of the fight immediately after his, which was Mina and Yuga as the heroes against Momo and Minoru as the villains. Well, one could hardly call it a fight. Momo had used her creation quirk to booby-trap the hell out of the doors and left Mina and Yuga with next to no way to get to the floor where the weapon was being held. Mina was currently trying to melt the door with her acid, but Momo had made some sort of material that was taking forever to burn through. Yuga wasn't much help. He tried shooting it with his laser for too long and got a stomach ache. Izuku entered the room quietly and flinched when he saw Katsuki staring at the screen with veins swelling along his face and his right eyelid twitching. He seemed totally oblivious to the fact that the rest of the class had backed away from him several steps and shot him nervous looked every 2 seconds or so. He walked over and nervously tapped his friend's shoulder. What the hell is it? Katsuki growled, turning slowly to glare at whoever had touched him. Oh, it's just Deku. What's wrong? You look really pissed. Like, more than normal, Izuku asked lowly. He was actually a little frightened of the look on the blonde teen's face. Izuku recognized that face. It meant Katsuki was winding himself up into a time bomb that could explode at any second. It's that little pal, Katsuki hissed through bared teeth, glaring back at the screen. Izuku's eyes followed his to the screen just in time to see Minoru trying to cop a feel of Momo's ass, but she was apparently already aware of what he was doing and turned to glare at him, all the while extracting a piece of metal from the skin on her chest. Minoru's sweat dropped nervously and backed off, but his grin was still unashamedly lecherous. How many times has he tried to do that? 5 tries, even after All Might told him to knock it off, Katsuki answered, clenching his hand until little explosions starting popping off. And he succeeded twice. Izuku's eyes gleamed with a strange light. A decision has been made. A decision has been made, Katsuki confirmed, eyelid twitching again as Minoru stared with a stupid grin at Momo on the screen. The rest of the class, including All Might, weren't sure whether to be afraid of their odd behavior or not. A little later, after each team completed the exercise and were briefed by All Might, who ran off at breakneck speeds, the girls found themselves in their locker room getting changed out of their hero costumes. "All right," Mina suddenly exclaimed as she started to button her school shirt back on. She looked around the room of changing girls with a wide grin. "So, what are the first impressions on the boys?" Kyoka shrugged her jacket off and shot the pink-skinned girl a wary look. "Why? Isn't that obvious? Which ones do y'all think are hot? Let's all just agree to permanently condemn Minoru," Momo grumbled a shower stall around the corner. She was trying to clean off the revolting feeling of that little rat touching her ass. "Twice." Ochako nodded, her cheek puffing up angrily. "Of course. That was so wrong. Hey Ochako, have you ever tried making something float up into space?" Toru asked innocently as she fixed her tie up. "Not a person," she replied, then paused for a second. "Yet, if he tries to cop a feel on me, I'm dissolving him into a puddle," Mina grinned nastily. She clapped her hands together. "But forget about that little perv for a second and go back to the main subject. The boys. Who's hot and who's not?" Suyu shrugged. "They're all okay, I guess. Can you be more specific? It'll take forever to discuss them all." "Fine," Mina pouted slightly. "The stars of the show today, then. What about Shoto?" "I thought he was pretty cool even though he froze my feet during our match," Toru said. "He's really calm and collected even in the heat of battle. I don't know how we could possibly have beaten him. He's way too strong. He is one of the 2 students in our class who got into UA on recommendations," Suyu agreed. "It's to be expected of him." Momo was amazing as well, even with her partner doing nasty things throughout her match. "I guess he's kinda cool," Mina eventually decided. "He seemed pretty aloof, though. I got that loner vibe from him." Momo came out of the showers wrapped in a towel and reached for her school clothes. "I'm sure he'll open up more as the year goes on. It's only the 2nd day, after all. Izuku and Koji barely got through the introductions this morning, remember?" "Oh, yeah," Mina grinned. "The wild card Izuku. Who saw him coming? I thought he was just a sweet little nerd at first, but he pulled that badass plan out with Ochako and won like it was nothing. He surprised everyone during the entrance exam, too," Ochako added while tying her shoelaces. "He destroyed that zero-pointer robot with one punch." "Wait, what?" Kyoka's jaw dropped. "The big thing that was knocking over buildings, you mean? Izuku destroyed that in a single punch." "Yeah, it was amazing," Ochako exclaimed, leaving out the part where he saved her. "I mean, he blew up his arm and legs, but he thrashed it." Suyu held a finger up to her lips. "His quirk is really strange. He uses fire, but he's got that superhuman strength, too." "How does that work?" "I believe is similar to Katsuki's ability to generate an explosive force," Momo replied. "But it seems as though Izuku can't control it nearly as well. From what I've seen, Katsuki's control over his explosions is much more refined than Izuku's is. It seems as though Izuku can use his flames well enough, just not to make things explode. There's probably some kind of backlash to it that his body can't handle." Toru clapped her hands together. His analysis skills were crazy good, too. Guess that nerdy side came in handy. "I didn't expect Katsuki to have so much faith in his plan, but I'll admit I was wrong," Kyoka added. "What's up with them, anyway? Katsuki treats everyone else in class like garbage except for Izuku. I think they're friends from middle school or something," Ochako commented. "I saw them going to the entrance exam together and they were walking to the station yesterday until Tenya and I caught up with them." "Or maybe," Mina's smile became pure mischief as she covered her wide grin with one hand. "They're in Louvre." Toru gasped. You think I can make anything relate to love? Mina laughed maniacally. Watch. It'll seem real before you know it. Don't jinx it. Ochako smiled nervously. I think Deku is probably one of the better guys in our class. It'd be a shame if he was already taken, you know. Oh. Mina spun towards her instantly, rejecting the possibility and a nickname already. Could it be? No. Ochako yelped, waving her hands at her friend. God. She should have seen that coming. That's not how it is. I barely know him. Knock it off, Mina, Kyoka agreed, though she smiled in amusement. There's no way to tell if any of the guys are dating material yet or not. For all we know, Katsuki could be the best option in the class. Momo winced. Okay. Don't jinx that. I know Katsuki is at least tolerable towards Izuku, but he's still unbelievably rude towards the rest of us. That's putting it lightly, Kyoka grumbled. I barely got to do anything during our fight. I just told him where Rikido and Koji were and then he ordered me to stay put until he beat them. I mean, we won, but still. Katsuki is strong, but he's always angry, so I can't imagine him ever being that popular, Suyu added. At least we know he can cool off a bit though. He's not a total jerk to Izuku, so maybe he'll warm up to us given time. Who knows, Kyoka huffed. I'm certainly not going to make an effort with him anytime soon. Mina grinned. There are a few other guys who did pretty well today, but those three were definitely in the spotlight. We'll have to chat about the rest later. Sure, Toru agreed, slinging her backpack over one shoulder on her way out of the locker rooms. Time to go. The girls left the lockers as a group and went outside to get back to the main building where homeroom was. They had just gotten outside and were about to reach the corner when a voice stopped them. Izuku was waiting by the corner and was pointing in their direction, but he was looking away. Hey, Minoru, there's a window to look into the girls' locker room right over here. Are you serious? You rock, Izuku, Toru squeaked in disbelief. Wait, what? Mina's head whipped up to inspect the wall of the building. There's a window like that. Kyoka was giving Izuku a disappointed look, though he hadn't yet noticed them. This is why you can't just outright decide if someone is dating material or not, Izuku's just another pervert. Izuku suddenly threw both of his arms straight up in the air and shouted. Goal. Minoru jumped into view briefly as he reached the corner, but before he could speak a word or even look towards the girls, there was a blur of motion behind him followed by a ruthless kick as one Katsuki Bakugo punted the undersized pervert right in the balls for all he was worth. An unspeakable crime was committed to the code of brothers with a furious scream that carried absolutely no remorse for said atrocity. D.E. A sonic boom ripped through the air as Minoru was sent flying over the grounds, past the huge building at the entrance to UA, straight through no less than 4 trees, and bounced roughly along the ground before coming to an abrupt stop when he hit the thick, steel wall surrounding the campus. And there he stopped, suspended about 6 feet off the ground by his own sticky hair, unconscious and drooling blood. The kick is good. Izuku lowered his arms and turned to inspect Katsuki's work, holding one hand over his eyes to see better. He whistled lowly as he pulled out his phone. That might be a new record. Hey, I figured it would be since he's way smaller than the rest of those goddamn I've killed before. Katsuki grinned viciously. What's my score? 1 sec. Izuku replied, tapping his phone and pointing it towards where Minoru had ended up to get the final distance. You made him go 914 meters. It's a new record. Katsuki fell to his knees, throwing both middle fingers towards Minoru as he screamed victoriously. Hell yeah, get Ed you little perv. All the while they were totally oblivious to the girls, who were still picking their jaws up off the ground after witnessing the gift of God that was Katsuki's perfect kick into Minoru's family package. I take back what I said about Izuku, Kyoka told her friends as soon as she was able to form a coherent sentence. That boy is a treasure and no one can tell me otherwise. Ochako was covering her mouth to hide her giggles. Izuku and Katsuki were still hyped over the latter's god-tier kick and were dramatically celebrating the achievement. I knew there was no way Deku would be like that. I guess he and Katsuki were putting Minoru in his place for getting all perverted with us. Agreed, Mina sighed happily, Still holding her phone up, she'd reflexively pulled it out to snap a long stream of photos of Minoru flying through the air. I don't think I've ever seen something so beautiful in my life. I almost feel bad, Tsuyu admitted, then bluntly added. I don't, though. Kyoka might have jinxed us, Toru said. Katsuki does have more than one good bone in his body. It's just small. Like his pinky finger. I'll take that pinky over Minoru any day, Momo told her. I must do something to repay him for that excellent kick. Let's just all agree for now. Mina stuffed her phone in her pocket as the girls watched Izuku and Katsuki walk off back to homeroom. Those two get top marks for today in our books. When they got back to homeroom, most of the class was already there. Katsuki still looked far too proud of himself, but he was being nicer than normal because of it. There was a group of other students hovering around him and Izuku, the latter of which was making notes in his notebook again and occasionally looking up to talk to them. Wait, you were the one who blasted Minoru into the wall. Eijiro exclaimed. Who else was gonna punt that little pal where the sun doesn't shine? Katsuki laughed. Honta visibly winced. Geez, does the bro code mean nothing to you? Tenya was chopping his hand towards the unashamed teen rapidly. Violence towards our classmates is not condoned in this campus under any circumstances besides hero training. Why have you done such a thing? Who cares why? That kick was awesome. Mina bounced over to the table with the other girls close behind her. Yeah, it was. Katsuki certainly didn't need his pride stoked any farther, but damn it, he deserved it right now. By the way, I've been wondering. Kyoka tilted her head in confusion. What on earth is a PAL? You've called Minoru that a few times, but I don't think it means he's your friend. Oh, it's an acronym we made up. Izuku spoke up and smiled at them a little bashfully. It means pervert at large. Katsuki and I used to play hero together when we were kids, but that was too childish in middle school, so we found a different way to play. And that way would be? Momo asked, one eyebrow raised. Find the perverts at school, assess their crimes, and, little explosions popped off in Katsuki's palm, his huge grin darkening evilly. Deal out the appropriate punishments. What are you, vigilantes against perverts? Toru's sweat dropped. It was for a good cause, Ochako giggled. Let's just call it early hero work. All right class, quiet down and get in your seats. Mr. Aizawa walked into the room, only to give Katsuki a blunt stare the moment he came through the door. Mr. Bakugo, I heard someone scream, die, and then saw Minoru go flying across campus and into the wall. He's still there, actually. Was that you? Damning straight it was. Katsuki's shit-eating grin held a disturbing resemblance to All Might's. Detention, Mr. Bakugo. Katsuki's grin persisted regardless. I regret nothing. Their third day of class started with an unexpected and, for most, rather unwelcome surprise. The media had discovered that All Might was teaching at UA and had come in force to investigate. The reporters couldn't actually get into UA without the school's permission, so they parked themselves outside by the door and interviewed everyone they could with single-minded ferocity. Izuku jumped when he was singled out by a woman who was probably in her mid-20s. What kind of lessons does All Might teach? Izuku recoiled from the mic that was practically shoved in his face. Geez, everyone's so noisy, Katsuki grumbled, grabbing Izuku by the back of his collar and dragging him along to the school. The reporter flashed towards him instead. What do you think of All Might? Wait, aren't you that kid from the sludge villain incident? A vein bulged in Katsuki's forehead, prompting a snarl. Off. From what Izuku could see as he let Katsuki drag him away from the chaos, Tenya was taking the whole interview thing pretty well, too well, in fact. The reporter questioning him looked annoyed by his long-winded and over-the-top answers. Elsewhere, another reporter had cornered a group consisting of Ochako, Tsuyu, Kyoka, and Mina, all four of which looked more than a little eager to get the hell out of there. They were all saved when Mr. Aizawa showed up, his exhausted and scruffy appearance causing many of the cameramen to cut the feed almost instantly. The guy just wasn't suited to being on the news. All Might is off duty at the moment. You are disturbing our students and the classes here, Aizawa told them bluntly, waving his hand as if to shoo them away. I need to ask you to politely vacate the premises. He glanced at his students, who eagerly ran over to him and then into the school, before turning away from the reporters. It nearly started an uproar of frustrated and unsatisfied questions. The reporter who had interrogated Izuku and Katsuki puffed up her cheek angrily. "Geez, just a little time is enough. Come on, send All Might out." "No, wait," an older reporter shouted as she walked too close to the entrance gate. With a loud slamming of metal, the gate crashed shut, providing several layers of impenetrable steel between the reporters and the school. The woman who had tripped the censor fell on her rear in shock. "It's the UA barrier," the reporter who had tried to warn her explained with a sigh. "That's what we call it, anyways. Without a staff or student ID, the doors snap shut automatically. There are even sensors all over the campus on the off chance someone actually breaks in." "That's so lame," she retorted, rising back to her feet and dusting herself off. "Why are they going so far to keep us out? They haven't even given us a cheap lie or some boring information to report." While the media raged in front of the barred gate, a man dressed in a long, black sleeve hoodie and worn-out pants behind them watched the scene in silence. Tired-looking red eyes gazed at the school with malevolence. "Pick a class president," Aizawa told them the moment everyone had settled in their seats. "I don't care how you decide it, just get it done before the period is up. We don't have much to discuss in homeroom today. Most of what we'll be doing is going to be handled during hero studies later." Instantly, pretty much the whole class was up and clamoring for themselves to be president. Even Izuku wouldn't deny he was kind of interested in the idea, but he was really nervous about it, as well. "Enough," Tenya suddenly interrupted. "This is no small decision that can be made just because you want to. The presidency is a sacred office that only the chosen may find themselves tasked with. Therefore, it should be decided by a democratic vote," he says with his hand raised up as high as the rest of us. Mina finished, grinning at the sight of the young man with his back ramrod straight and his hand held high in the air. Suyu held a finger to her chin. "It's a bit early to have developed any trust in each other, isn't it? Everyone will probably just vote for themselves. Is that not why the person who earns multiple votes will be truly worthy of the task?" Tenya demanded. "If their charisma is such that they can earn the trust of many this early amongst class relations, they must possess the qualities worthy of class president." Kyoka sighed and leaned back in her seat. "Sure, why not? Let's vote, guys. Robot isn't going to let up on us anytime soon if we don't." The votes were made anonymously so no one could be singled out for their vote, but by the end of the next 10 minutes, all the votes were tallied and written up on the blackboard. The scores were as such. Izuku Midoriya, 5 votes. Momo Yaoyorozu, 3 votes. Katsuki Bakugo, 2 votes. Eijiro Kirishima, 1. Mashirao Ojiro, 1. Minoru Mineta, 1. Koji Koda, 1. Mezu Shoji, 1. Denki Kaminari, 1. Honta Siro, 1. Fumikage Tokiyami, 1. Rikido Sato, 1. Yuga Aoyama, 1. Needless to say, Izuku was a little happy, extremely shocked, and absolutely terrified from the results. "I got 5 votes. How?" Izuku half squeaked, half screamed. "Who the hell voted for you?" Katsuki demanded, flabbergasted. Honta looked at the blonde teen with a stunned look. "More like who the hell voted for you of all people. What's that supposed to mean?" Kyoka made a show of plugging one of her earphone jacks into her phone and played some music, ignoring the rest of the class. "I'm only doing something nice for him this once because he kicked Minoru's ass yesterday and won the exercise for us. I'm still kind of glad he didn't win, though." In the back of the classroom, Ochako was whistling innocently as she studied the wall. "It'd probably be really scary if Katsuki found out I voted for Izuku. He's way nerdy and shy, but he lined up that kick for Katsuki so perfectly yesterday that I don't care." Mina grinned to herself as she watched Izuku flail in a panic. "I'd rather vote for someone who looks out for us and isn't a dick. Plus, he's kinda cute. I couldn't decide between voting for Momo or Izuku, so I just flipped a coin," Suyu thought. She was satisfied with the results since they were both president and vice president. "Guys, why didn't you vote for ME?" Minoru whined to his fellow males. Didn't you hear my policies for all the girls to expose at least 30 centimeters of thigh? Yeah, and we also heard you hit the wall yesterday when Katsuki punted you like 1,000 yards from across campus. Mashiro's sweat dropped. No thank you, I choose life. Also, that's disgusting, Rikido added. No one wants that. Learn some common decency before you try to do something like become class president, Fumikage told him. Minoru waved his fists in the air desperately. All of you are so gay. And they're way smarter than your dumb ass. Minoru felt death itself touch him as Katsuki Bakugo's hand lay itself upon his shoulder with false kindness. I haven't had to murder a PAL twice before, but I wonder how far I could blast you from here. We're on the 3rd floor and there are fewer obstacles on the way to whatever level of hell you land in this time. Should I try it? Why you wouldn't dare, Minoru squeaked, looking over his shoulder and nearly pissing himself at the monstrous grin on Katsuki's face. You got detention for it last time. And it was worth every second, Katsuki cackled, his eyes becoming almost deranged. The hand on Minoru's shoulder made a few tiny explosions, causing the short teen to squeal in panic. Go on, say another perverted thing. I'm begging you. No, I choose life, Minoru screamed, diving under the nearest desk. Katsuki looked a little disappointed. Fine, you get off with a warning this time. Normally I'd call you out for bullying, but what Minoru is doing is blatant UAL harassment, so I'll overlook it this time, Mina commented with a smirk. Katsuki merely grunted in response. Tenya had his fists clenched in frustration upon his desk. 0 votes, it's only fair since I insisted upon the sacredness of the role. You didn't even vote for yourself despite wanting the job so badly, Honta's sweat dropped. What's up with that? Mr. Aizawa got out of his sleeping bag and stood up, giving the class the final announcement. So then it's President Midoriya and Vice President Yaoyorozu. Now standing at the front of class, Izuku looked like he would panic at any second. Are you serious? Momo sighed. It was pretty close. That's it for homeroom today, Aizawa told them. Do your best in your other classes and prepare yourselves for the trials that await you in heroics training later. Izuku sighed, poking at his rice with his fork as he considered what had gone on that morning. Around him, Tenya, Ochako, Tsuyu, and Mina were also eating, though more enthusiastically than he was. What's the matter, Deku? Ochako asked after she swallowed a bite of her lunch. You look kinda worn out. Oh, it's nothing, he said quickly, snapping out of his little mental checkout. I was just wondering if I've really got what it takes for this whole class president thing. Mina elbowed his arm playfully. Sure you are, Tenya nodded. You'll be fine. You've got the guts and snap judgment when it counts, Izuku. That's why I voted for you. So one of the votes was you. Izuku gave the other teen a perplexed look, shaking his head before leaning his chin on his palm. That's another thing, how did I get 5 votes? Well, I assume you voted for yourself, plus Tenya voted for you. Tsuyu held a finger up, adding more as she listed off names. I flipped a coin between you and Momo since I couldn't decide and you won that flip, so 3. Mina voted for you, too. Wait, what? Izuku whipped his head to gape at the 2 girls and his jaw fell open. You 2 voted for me. Duh, Mina snickered and poked his freckles with a pink finger, causing the teen to blush furiously. You set up one hell of a kick for Katsuki yesterday to stop Minoru from doing perverted things to us. I saved one of those pictures as my screensaver, even. But Katsuki is still too much of an ass for us to vote for him. That's how you got my approval. Ochako too, right? Izuku spun back to Ochako, who half-choked on her rice when Mina called her out. I. Ochako managed to swallow the bite down and sighed in relief for a second. She grinned bashfully and rubbed the back of her head. Yeah, guilty. Hey. Izuku wasn't sure what shocked him more. The fact that he'd somehow managed to become class president, or the fact that more than half of the votes for him came from teenage girls his age. Seriously, he barely knew anything about them. They were an alien species to him. But I'm surprised you didn't vote for yourself, Tenya, Ochako said hurriedly in an effort to swing the attention away from her. You wanted to be class president so badly. You've got the glasses look down, 2. Izuku's sweat dropped. That's not exactly a quality we should be using to choose a class president. I merely followed my own judgment on the matter, Tenya replied. Besides, even if I had voted for myself, the rest of your votes would have assured Izuku the presidency. Suddenly, the room was filled to the ringing of an alarm, causing the 5 of them to jump. An announcement rang over the speakers. Security level 3 has been breached. Students, please promptly evacuate. Tenya's head jerked towards one of the nearby upperclassmen. What's security level 3? It means someone's infiltrated the school grounds. This hasn't happened in 3 years. We gotta hurry out of here. The whole lunchroom immediately became a scene of mass hysteria as students scrambled to get out. Izuku knew there'd be no getting out if they got swept into that crowd, so he pushed aside his lunch and jumped onto the table to get a better look around. His eyes locked onto the windows nearby, spotting Present Mike and Mr. Aizawa standing outside. They were facing a crowd of reporters, who were clamoring at the pair of pros for all might. Izuku blinked in disbelief at the sight. The press got into the school. How? He spun around, trying to figure out how to settle the panicking students. If it was just the press, then this whole mass hysteria thing wasn't worth it and would only get someone hurt. Izuku tried to speak up, but it came out as a squeak. Hey, everybody calm down. It's just the news. No one heard him, not even his friends, who had taken a point from him and were standing on their seats. Tenya was snapping at the other students to form an orderly line, but it was no good. Everyone was panicking. It's no good, how do I get their attention? Izuku wondered frantically. Suddenly, he had an idea. Albeit a crazy idea, but, he took a deep breath and clenched his fists tightly. When in doubt, speak Katsuki. Deee. Everyone in the room froze at the scream and spun towards the source, one very red-faced Izuku, standing on the table with both hands clapped over his mouth. He couldn't believe he'd gotten the nerve to do that, but he did his best to act as soon as he got their attention. It's just the press. Look. He pointed at the window, prompting the rest of the students to look over and confirm for themselves that he was right. The moment they all started figuring it out, Izuku jumped off the table and did his best to hide. Holy crap, that was way too much. Not exactly what I'd call a great way of getting attention, but, Mina grinned a little. Nice. Why are you hiding now? Suyu asked him bluntly. Izuku was sweating, his face still cherry red. I've never yelled at a bunch of people like that before, it's scary. Ochako put a hand over her mouth to stop herself from giggling. You sounded like Katsuki for a second, there. Tenya chopped a hand towards them. While I applaud Izuku for settling the hysteria, we must still evacuate. Press or not, we still have evacuating instructions. He's right, Izuku said, fanning his face. Let's go. Mina smiled and pat him on the shoulder, causing him to tense up again. Good going, Mr. Scaredy Class Prez. Once the reporters had been dealt with, the rest of the day went by as usual. As soon as it was time for heroics class, they dressed up in their costumes and made their way out to the entrance to the same training field as yesterday for the battle trials. Mr. Aizawa and All Might both were waiting for them. The former of the two pros cleared his throat and started explaining the lesson. Right, this is going to be somewhat similar to the entrance exam. There will be combat robots all over the city, but this time your job is going to be about working as a team. Yesterday you got to work together in pairs, this time you will be working as a whole class. On occasion, pros have to work in large groups. This is meant to simulate that kind of scenario. We'll be doing this exercise today and tomorrow, followed by rescue training on Friday. I want you all to keep in mind that this is merely a rough outline of much more advanced training for later. Your task is simple: eliminate as many of the enemy villains as possible by working together as a team. You should also focus on keeping the amount of damage done to buildings to a minimum. In the field, leaving behind destroyed buildings is obviously not ideal. I'm looking at you, Katsuki. Katsuki looked away from them all, slightly red in the face. Shut up. I'll be watching with Recovery Girl in case things get out of hand, Aizawa went on. Oh, and one more thing. Izuku, you're not participating in this training today. You're working with All Might. EHHHH. Pretty much the entire class exclaimed, including Izuku. Wait, Izuku's getting lessons from All Might. Eijiru's jaw was hanging open. Why just him? Mezzo questioned. Yeah, why's the class president getting extra lessons from the world's greatest hero? Favoritism much. I think we need a better president. Minoru tried to convince the others to join his side, but to no avail. Aizawa sighed tiredly. Would you lot quiet down? We're wasting time. The class quieted, albeit reluctantly, as All Might took center stage. I'm sure you're all wondering why young Izuku is getting extra lessons separate from the rest of you, but it's not what you think. I'm not training him personally or giving him special privileges. He's getting, shall we call it a corrective course? Corrective course, Tenya echoed. Did he do something wrong? He blew his body up twice in as many days with his quirk, Aizawa replied bluntly. That's the problem. His main method of fighting with his quirk critically damages both himself because he lacks control, and could endanger the lives of anyone fighting him. That's where All Might comes in. He's an expert on quirk control. How? Denki asked. I mean, no offense, but all you do is punch and kick stuff. No offense taken, young Denki. But it's a bit more complicated than that. All Might answered. When I use my quirk, I have to gauge the amount of power I put into it very carefully. For example, against a giant robot, I can go full throttle and blow it away. But if I used that same level of power on a person, what would happen? A few faces paled at that thought. All Might nodded gravely. You've guessed. Yes, as gruesome as it is to say, I'd probably kill them with that kind of force. In order to avoid that, I must gauge the degree of power I release with each attack carefully. Too much can kill a person. Too little might not be enough to capacitate my opponent. Power is just power without the finesse to guide it properly. Young Katsuki and young Shoto are good examples of this. Aizawa grunted. The two of them have a high power capacity, but they have the control to manage it well without overdoing things. For the time being, that's a skill Izuku lacks, so All Might is going to grill him until he doesn't blow himself up anymore. But that brings me to another thing I need to talk to you all about. Do any of you have trouble controlling your quirks? He asked. I know it might be embarrassing to admit, or perhaps you think you can control it in time, but I need to know right now before we get into any more serious training. If someone loses control and we have an accident, it can be forgiven, but I won't be the one picking you up if you get upset with yourself. Is that clear? The class was silent for a few seconds before one teen raised his hand. All Might looked at him, still smiling. Young Fumikage. It's somewhat situational, he began a little quietly. But on occasion, my quirk, Dark Shadow, has been known to run wild. I'd rather explain it more in private. I understand. All Might gave him a thumbs up. Anyone else? Ochako rubbed the back of her head nervously. I don't know if it's because I lack control or not, but if I use my quirk on myself for too long, I get really nauseous. That could be because you haven't trained your quirk enough yet, but I would still like to see it for myself, All Might replied. Is there anyone else? When no one responded, All Might set his hands on his hips. In that case, young Fumikage and young Ochako will meet with me after class ends today to discuss their quirks. You'll likely have a training session with myself and young Izuku tomorrow. If that's all, then I'll leave you to Mr. Aizawa. Young Izuku, you're with me. Izuku dipped his head quickly and chased after the pro as he walked off. Why yes, sir. They ended up going to TDL, the place that Izuku had been brought before school started to show his quirk to the teachers. All Might led him inside and cleared his throat, immediately getting the boy's attention. I'm sorry that I singled you out from the rest of your classmates today, All Might began. But I felt it would be unwise to hold off training you to use one for all any longer. Recovery Girl gave me more than a few choice words when you destroyed your finger the other day. Sorry about that, Izuku mumbled. I was just desperate. It's fine. It's my fault for holding your training off for so long, the pro reassured him. But that stops now. We're going to get you to the point where you can use one for all safely. The easiest way to do that, in my experience, is through combat. Izuku paled. Wait, why you mean, like I have to F-fight why you? I'll go easy on you, All Might said gently, turning to face him. Today at least, I won't strike back. There's no point in beating you black and blue if you can't use your power properly yet. That wasn't exactly the most reassuring thing in the world, and Izuku still had a few concerns. Wait, what about what you said to the rest of class? If I can't control One for All and hit you full power, then you won't hurt me. All Might lifted one huge hand to tousle the teenager's curly hair. Fortunately for us, One for All comes with a sort of mental training wheels for new users. Training wheels. Yes, when you use One for All against a person for the first time, there's a tendency to think that you don't want to kill that person. One for All usually responds to that, and your body sets it to a low power setting that you should be able to handle without destroying yourself. Izuku blinked and began to mutter to himself. I see, so it's kind of like the mental restraints the brain puts on the human body to prevent it from destroying itself with the full capability of its muscles. All Might cut him off before Izuku could fully nerd out. That's the theory, but the idea is that you'll eventually get a grasp of that low power setting whenever you attack until you can use it at will. We'll continue training here until you get it down. Also, we'll be working on your own quirk as well. Ideally, I'd like to get you to the point where you can wield both One for All and All Flare at the same time. The pro pulled out a tablet that was similar to the one Nezu had used back when they tested Izuku's power for the first time, and just like before, the Bunsen burner-like device emerged from the floor. Izuku frowned at All Might nervously. I won't hurt you. My costume is fireproof. All Might chuckled, flexing his arms. No worries, young man. Okay. Izuku forced a smile on his face as he started using All Flare, green flames licking at his body. It wasn't even close to the full body flare, but he got his hands and feet ignited on his own easily enough this time. He reached out towards the Bunsen burner to gather more flames until his arms, legs, and most of his torso were all ablaze. All Might grinned as the flames finally covered the teen's whole body, including the two extensions of his costume that resembled All Might's hair. They started to sway gently with the fire, hiding the fact that they were really horns. Come at me with everything you've got, young Izuku. Yes, Izuku shouted back, then rushed All Might head on. He brought a fist back, clenching it tightly to wind up One for All. All Might raised both arms to block and took the blow directly, shifting into a crouch so that his center of gravity was lower. The punch struck All Might's thick arms, but it didn't even make him budge. Izuku gaped in surprise. He hadn't blown his arm up with that, but he expected it to have more of an effect. Don't stop now, All Might told him, still grinning. I told you the power output would be low. Just get used to the feeling of it. Keep going. Izuku jolted into action and began to punch and kick at All Might with One for All, never letting up on his blows. The pro weathered them with ease, not so much as flinching from every strike that landed. After a few minutes of attacking him, All Might suddenly dodged one of Izuku's punches, causing him to yelp and overextend. He nearly fell over, but regained his balance. All Might laughed. You're getting it, but a villain isn't going to stay put and let you attack them. Come and get me. The teen lunged after his pro mentor with a yell, who caught the blow with his hand and simply diverted the attack before he jumped away again. All Might wasn't even using One for All himself, otherwise there would be no way Izuku could keep up with him. Izuku suddenly missed one of his punches and ended up smashing his fists into one of the cement pillars in the room. He winced, but grinned a moment in pleasant surprise. He hadn't accidentally unleashed the full 100% by striking the rock. And he was starting to get a feel for this low power setting, but it took him time to wind it up in each limb one after another. A thought struck him. Maybe if I spread it all over me like All Flare. He tensed up and slowly let One for All spread through his whole body. The power crackled like lightning through his muscles, bones, and blood. It was tricky to maintain and he didn't think he could hold it for long, but this would be a lot faster and more efficient than just firing up one limb after another. All Might noticed the change and grinned widely. He could see that Izuku's body was starting to adapt to One for All just as it had with All Flare. In fact, the two quirks were starting to mix. Izuku whipped towards All Might and lunged at him, this time much faster than before. With the low power setting spread throughout his whole body, he was able to push off with his legs using that enhanced strength and a burst of his flames. The sudden increase in speed caught All Might off guard momentarily, but he responded with inhuman reflexes. He ducked underneath a kick that would have caught him in the side of the head and reached up to grab the teenager by the ankle, then threw him aside. Izuku hit the ground with a yelp, but he rolled back to his feet and charged again, still intent on fighting. All Might started laughing as the teen attacked him in earnest, firing off blow after blow at him with the fusing quirks. It wasn't a perfect fusion by any means and Izuku was visibly struggling to maintain the combination, but he could do it. Let me try this. Izuku was starting to feel excited by his new capabilities. He gathered all of the flames covering his body into his right arm until he had created an enlarged arm of fire that would extend his reach. With a battle cry that freed itself, unbidden from his lungs, he struck at All Might with it. The pro's hand shot out to catch the blow, but his upper body was engulfed in emerald flame as Izuku launched the fire fist at him upon impact. Izuku suddenly realized that he'd practically buried his teacher in fire and immediately shut them down, freeing All Might from the blast of flames and simultaneously stopping the flow of One for All throughout his body. I'm sorry, I got carried away. Are you? All Might started laughing wildly, uproariously, making Izuku go quiet in confusion. The pro's hair looked a bit singed and he was practically steaming from the heat, but his grin persisted nonetheless. That was excellent, All Might exclaimed. You're learning quickly. Izuku felt a swell of hesitant pride rise up in him. Really? Indeed. Did you break any bones? The teen looked himself over and gauged the feeling in his body. He didn't think he'd broken anything, but his right fist felt a little strained and it was definitely tender from that last blow. I don't think so, but I might have overdone things with my right. Considering this was your first go using the low power setting of One for All, I think we can call that a success. All Might gave him a thumbs up. The whole point of this training is to help you reach a point where you can use One for All without destroying your body. At the moment, I'd say you're capable of wielding about 5% or so. Only 5%. Izuku wilted slightly. That was it. We've all got to start somewhere. All Might patted his shoulder. Your body still needs training before it can handle the full power of One for All. We'll just work our way up from here, right? Izuku smiled a bit and nodded. Right, good. All Might took a few steps back. Back to it, then. Go easy with your right and don't throw that huge fire punch again for today. I want you to be able to use that 5% for as long as possible without going over the limit. Flare yourself back up and come at me, young man. Yes, sir. Ow. Izuku winced as he walked to the lockers. His body hurt all over and his right hand was starting to throb. He hadn't broken any bones, but everything hurt from his extensive use of One for All, plus he felt a little too hot after using his flames for so long. As he approached the lockers, he realized that his whole class was gathered outside the girls' locker room and all of them were still wearing their hero costumes. Frowning, Izuku approached them. Ochako spotted him coming over and waved. Oh, Deku, how'd it go? Great, he replied, smiling. I didn't break any of my bones this time. What's going on? Momo turned towards him with her arms crossed. We can hear strange noises coming from inside our lockers. None of us girls have gone inside, so we're not sure who could be in there. It sounds like an animal, Kyoka muttered. One of her jacks was plugged into the door. There's loud breathing and something keeps hitting the lockers. How could an animal get into the locker room, anyway? Eijiro asked, perplexed. No idea, Mina replied with a grumble. But I'm not going in there until I know what exactly it is. Move it, heartthrob. Katsuki pushed Kyoka aside, who was a little flustered by his choice of a nickname, and placed his ear against the door. His eyes narrowed suddenly. Hey, Deku, listen. Izuku did as he asked and mirrored his pose, listening to the odd sounds. It sure sounded like an animal was in there. Heavy breathing, something rattling the lockers, and yet also. He stiffened. Katsuki heard it too and snarled. My PAL senses are tingling. You did not just use that quote, Denki accused in disbelief. Izuku leaned away from the door, his face serious and his tone all business. Right, Katsuki and I are going in. Bar the door and don't let anything out until I say so. Wait, you intend to enter the girls' locker room? Tenya demanded, chopping his hand at Izuku. Mr. President, that is a blatant disregard of the rules. Momo did her best to ease his concerns. It's fine, I trust them not to mess with our stuff. If a teacher comes by, we'll explain the situation. Be careful, you two. Izuku nodded and gripped the door handle slowly. He looked at Katsuki, who cracked his knuckles with an eager grin. Ready. I was born ready, mother. Izuku smirked at that, then quickly yanked open the door, letting Katsuki in before he dove in after him. Momo immediately shut the door behind them. Things were quiet for a few seconds. They still heard the loud breathing as Kyoka plugged one of her jacks into the door. It was several moments before everything went absolutely silent. 10 seconds of no sound passed by eerily. Class 1A waited, the air becoming thick with tension. Then they heard a shrill scream, followed by a roar of fury from Katsuki and a yell from Izuku. The sounds of metal clanging loudly began to ravage the lockers, along with several explosions courtesy of Katsuki. Die, 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 drop them right now. Never, they're my trophies. You little come here. You'll kill me, that's the point. You won't take me alive. I'm gonna murder you anyway. Corner it in the showers. It's trying to climb the walls. I've got it. Let me go. Deku, don't do it. You have to finish it, Katsuki. Go on without me. Deku, no, my trophies. The only trophy you're getting is a coffin. This is for Deku, you little shit. There was a loud squeal, followed by a scream from Izuku. Clear the door. The class practically leapt away from the door as Katsuki screamed at the top of his lungs. Plus ultra diiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiiii. A horrifying scream tore through the locker room, followed by an explosive projectile that literally blew the door clean off its hinges. The object in question flew through the air for several hundred meters, perhaps even 1,000, before it crashed into the wall surrounding campus and hung there, 6 feet off the ground. The utterly stunned class realized the projectile had been one Minoru Mineta, now bloodied and beaten within an inch of his life, and once more stuck on the wall of UA by his own sticky hair. Katsuki emerged from the devastation gasping for breath and slumped to the ground once he made it out. Holy! Eijiro and Kyoka ran up to him. Are you okay? Katsuki waved them off. Forget about me, get to Deku. It could already be too late for him. Exchanging anxious looks, the other girls ran inside while Momo stopped the rest of the males from entering the lockers. Deku, Ochako called through the smoke. Christ, the place looked like a war zone. Where are you? I'm here. His voice sounded weak and shaky. Ochako ran over to the showers with Mina, Tsuyu, and Toru right behind her. They found Izuku curled up in a corner, breathing heavily and shaking. She was alarmed that maybe he'd been really hurt. Deku, are you okay? And no, he whimpered, turning to show them his hands. Now I'm the pervert. Stuck to his hands were 2 of Minoru's purple spheres, and also stuck upon each one was a pair of panties. Minoru had, after pillaging the garments from the lockers, stuck them to his hair in an effort to keep his prize until Izuku yanked them from the thief's head at the grave cost of his own morality. Mina's cheeks puffed up to stop herself, but she couldn't hold back and busted out laughing until she was doubled over and her sides hurt like hell. Ahahahahaha. The other girls joined in, though they sounded slightly more sympathetic to Izuku's plight. They did feel bad. The preciously innocent and sweet teenage boy was almost in tears since there was no way to remove the spheres and thus the panties from his tainted hands. Mina finally regained control of her breathing and eyed the frilly pink pair of underwear stuck on Izuku's right hand. She giggled and wiped a stray tear from her eye. Izuku, you can just burn them off with your quirk. I don't want those since Minoru touched them, anyway. Same here, Toru agreed, recognizing her own pair of blue and white striped panties in the teen's left hand. But Izuku's already crimson face started to steam from embarrassment. Then UW won't have any UU underwear F for of the D-Day. Toru shrugged. That's fine, no one will notice if I don't wear any. Besides, it's almost time for us to go home, Mina reassured him. We'll just head straight back to get new ones, okay? Izuku nodded after a moment, still blushing furiously. Ochako couldn't help but smile at him. Come on, let's get you out of here before a teacher shows up. She carefully helped Izuku stand without touching his hands and they walked the teen out of the lockers. Upon arriving at the door, however, Izuku bumped into someone and yelped. I'm sorry, please watch out for my hands. All Might stared down at him, unsure what to even think when he saw Izuku walking out of the girl's locker, 2 purple balls in his hands and a pair of panties stuck to each. Moreover, by bumping into All Might, Izuku had instinctively recoiled and caused the sticky spheres to land on his own chest. Now it appeared as though he had 2 purple S with panties on top and was groping them. The blood drained from Izuku's face faster than should have been possible as All Might just tried to process what in the actual he was looking at. The pro slowly turned, following the path of destruction to the door that lay 100 meters away, and then to the bleeding ruin that was Minoru attached to the wall. He eventually looked back at Izuku, opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally walked off to do something about Minoru. Okay. And that was that. Having finished their homework for the night, Izuku and Katsuki were hanging out at Katsuki's home and spending the last hour or so before Izuku had to go home playing games on a PlayStation 2. They were currently playing Guitar Hero 3, Legends of Rock, trying to win on Through the Fire and Flames, set to moderate difficulty. Neither of them had ever beaten this song on hard mode, god tier that it was. Goddamn," Katsuki swore as he missed a note. He recovered quickly, but this song was utterly unforgiving if you really got off track. Izuku was biting his lip, trying to focus. The 4.5 minutes or so they spent on this song brought with it as much intensity as one of their training sessions at UA. They barely took a moment to breathe. When it was all said and done, the 2 teens flopped onto the couch behind them with near simultaneous groans. Izuku set his guitar aside while Katsuki just chucked his onto the floor. I'm over this thing for the night, he growled, shaking his left hand to work the sore muscles out. I second that, Izuku leaned his head on the back of the couch with a sigh. It always felt good to beat Through the Fire and Flames, but good God it took a lot out of you, especially after a hard day at high school. I'm going home, he decided after glancing at the clock. He only had like 10 minutes before he had to leave anyways and he was getting tired. Katsuki grunted. Whatever. See ya. Yup, Izuku replied, walking to the kitchen table to grab his backpack. Katsuki's mother was there, sipping on a cup of coffee while she scrolled through something on her phone. She looked up as he came by to pick up his stuff. Going home? Yes, ma'am. Thanks for having me over. Need a ride? It's okay. I want to burn off some more energy before I get home. Suit yourself, she shrugged. Night, Izuku. Good night, Bakumon. Yes, he called her that. Only Katsuki thought it was weird. No, he did not care. Izuku left the Bakugo's house and made straight for his own family's apartment. It was only like a 10-minute walk, but it gave him time to reflect on stuff. The last 2 days had been crazy at school. The majority of the class had continued the robot battling exercises that started yesterday during today's lesson as well. Ochako and Fumikage had joined him and All Might for a training session to get their quirks checked out for control issues. All Might had confirmed that Ochako's issue with her quirk causing her nausea was due to her needing more practice with it. She would just have to build herself up until she could either suppress the nausea or hold it off for a longer amount of time. Fumikage was something else. Smentos had created a dark isolation room with his quirk for All Might to see what was going on with the teen's control problem, so Izuku hadn't actually seen what happened inside, but whatever it was made the building tremor multiple times. That went on for about 30 seconds until what seemed like an artillery shell impact stopped the prior tremors cold. When Smentos retracted the room of concrete, Fumikage was nearly unconscious and All Might had a nasty-looking bruise forming on his arm. The pro hero didn't look all that exerted, though he seemed rather impressed by what he'd seen. Dark Shadow became timid once he was exposed to light, but Izuku could have sworn he heard the shadowy creature mutter something like, "I didn't get to show off," after the event. What the hell even had happened in there? All Might had told Fumikage, once he recovered from whatever he'd endured within the dark room, that he would need lessons to control his quirk like Izuku did, but he was okay to perform in daytime operations with the rest of class. That didn't seem to surprise Fumikage, although he seemed more than a little stunned by what had gone down in the dark room. When Izuku and Ochako asked him later, all he said was this. "He stopped Dark Shadow with one shot," Fumikage muttered in a sort of odd daze. Izuku didn't use his full-body flare during the sessions with Ochako and Fumikage. He managed to get the flames going on his hands and feet, but there was no way in hell he was going to go for the full-on flare with them around. He was still trying to get comfortable using it with All Might, and he trusted the pro more than pretty much anyone. Regulating one for all was getting better. Izuku hadn't broken any bones during these training sessions, but he didn't quite feel like he was fully adapted to the low-power setting yet. The few times he tried targeting a non-human object, like a cement target made by Smentos, he could feel his power fluctuate and it took a while to get it back under control. All Might had told him that targeting a person and a non-living object would be different from a mental standpoint, but he hadn't thought it would be this hard. Practice, practice, practice. That was all he could do for now, until he got used to the low-power setting. Izuku was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't watch where he was going and startled when a small shape ran into him. He nearly stumbled, but kept his footing, eyes going wide when the child who ran into him fell back with a gasp. I'm sorry," he yelped, kneeling immediately to check if they were okay. "Did I hurt you?" The child, a little girl, stared up at him with wide, red eyes, her face covered in sweat while she panted for breath. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, with long, choppy white hair and a small horn on the right side of her forehead. She was wearing a short-sleeve dress with no footwear, but what really caught Izuku off guard were the bandages covering her arms and legs. She initially cringed away from him, but froze when he laid his hand gently on her shoulder. Her wide eyes were uncertain as she opened her mouth to answer him. "Eri, there you are. Geez, stop running, will ya?" Izuku looked up from the child expecting to see a parent, so he was stunned when he found himself looking at a tall, muscular man in a black suit, wearing a dark red, beak-shaped mask over his face. He couldn't see the man's face at all, so the only way he was able to tell the individual was male was by his voice and body. The man's hand clenched a little, as though he were irritated and trying to stop himself from making a fist. "Who are you?" "Actually, never mind, I don't care. Sorry if my daughter bumped into you, but we gotta get going now." "Come on, Eri." Oh, it was my fault she fell. I'm sorry." Izuku started to help her stand up. "Here, let me." Eri said something under her breath that he couldn't catch. "Say again." One of her little hands clenched the fabric of his shirt and Izuku was suddenly aware that she was shaking. Her voice was hoarse and he could hear the tremor in every word she spoke. "He's not my daddy." The raw terror in her voice sent a chill up his spine, but Izuku forced down any visible reactions he might have had. If the kidnapper figured out that Izuku knew what was going on, there was no telling what he would do. Worst case scenario, he would go on the attack. His mind started to race, running calculations and scenarios through every cell his brain had to spare. Contact the police. No, too slow to respond given the situation. It wasn't like he could talk to them, either. They might assume his call was a prank or something. Not worth the risk. Pick up Eri and run. Too risky. He didn't know if this guy was armed or what his quirk was. He needed more data to make that plan work. Fight the villain. Even riskier. In addition to the formerly mentioned unknown factors, Izuku had no idea if this guy would care about damaging the houses around them. He didn't want to get innocent people involved in this and it would put Eri in further danger. He also didn't have a hero license yet, so a head-on attack would be illegal. He could only fight back in self-defense. Try to get in touch with one of his emergency contacts and stall for time. Chancy at best, given that he didn't know where exactly his contacts were and he would have to stall for time. The odds were it would take several minutes at the very least, but it was the best option he had at the moment. That would be his starting point. There was no other choice. He'd have to pick the situation apart as it went on and adapt from there. "Were you guys playing tag or something?" Izuku asked the villain, trying to keep his voice normal. He made a show of looking around and behind the guy. "Is someone else chasing you?" It was just luck on Izuku's part that the villain reflexively followed his gaze to look over his shoulder. "Nah, it's just us. But she ran a bit too far away from the motel we're staying at." "Gotcha." Izuku slowly helped Eri up onto her feet, letting her remain close to him. The way she was attached to his torso would make it harder for the villain to spot his left arm hiding behind him. Taking his phone out of his back pocket and dialing the second emergency contact on his phone right after his mother. Hey, I think she got hurt falling earlier. We should take her to AD doctor to see if she's okay." The man cocked his head back towards Izuku and Eri. "No need, my boss is a doctor. He'll fix her up." Eri whimpered and squeezed Izuku's shirt tighter. She knew the doctor, Izuku realized, and he probably wasn't a good person. The way she reacted made him suspicious that this wasn't just a kidnapping, it might be a retrieval. The villain seemed familiar with Eri and she knew the doctor he was talking about. He wondered if that was why she was covered in bandages. They'd hurt her and she'd tried to escape. Now one of them had caught up to her and Izuku had no intention of letting them take her back. He mentally added in the possibility that there were other villains around looking for her. The guy mentioned a boss, so he probably wasn't the only crony around here. "Eri, come on, we gotta go," the villain ordered. Izuku looked up at the man, trying to make eye contact, but it was impossible with his mask. I think she's a little spooked. How about I walk back to the motel with you guys? To make up for me causing her to fall." "No," Izuku could hear the edge to his voice this time. The villain was getting impatient. Boss doesn't like strangers popping up out of nowhere. "Eri, get over here, now." She stilled for a moment and then let Izuku go, spinning around to go to the man. It caught him so off guard that she would actually move towards the kidnapper that Izuku acted without thinking and pulled her back to him, holding her protectively. Eri gasped, looking at Izuku with horrified eyes. He froze, staring at the villain. The villain went utterly silent for several seconds. His head cocked to the side a little. "Hey, you were just a little annoying a moment ago, but now you're getting on my nerves." He'd ed up. Oh, he'd ed up bad. The man's hand clenched again and Izuku saw a spark of flame rush along his fingers. "I'm only going to ask you this once since you were so polite earlier. Give her back to me and I'll forget about you." A flame quirk. The villain had a flame quirk. Izuku ran that information through his calculations. His chances of successfully fighting off the villain or retreating from him with Eri had just greatly increased. He just had to stall for as long as possible. Izuku felt the rush of blood through his veins, the same as it had when he tried to save Katsuki and Ochako before. "I don't feel comfortable just letting her leave with you. I'd rather we go to the hospital." "Wrong answer," the villain snarled. He held up both arms, letting flame blaze over his limbs until they were both burning up to his shoulder. "Boss ain't gonna like this, but he'll like it less if I don't bring Eri back." Izuku got a shock when the villain launched a fireball straight at them, regardless of Eri being in the way. He barely had time to get both arms around her and jump away before the flames rushed over the street. "What are you doing?" he gasped, shocked by the villain's total disregard for the girl. "You could have killed her. Like I care." The villain gathered up some of his flames in his right hand and threw another fireball, which Izuku dodged again. "Even if I her up, the boss can just fix her again." So the villain didn't give a damn whether he hit Eri or not. That shifted the odds out of Izuku's favor somewhat, but he could still work with this. The guy was chucking fireballs all over the street. Izuku could take advantage of this. He landed with Eri still in his arms and faced an oncoming fireball head-on. One of his hands whipped up, becoming enveloped in emerald flame and drew the outside source of fire to him. Izuku's flames consumed the villains and transmuted them in a matter of seconds, giving him more fire to work with. The villain appeared to be dumbfounded for a moment. Izuku took the chance to stuff his phone back in his pocket, but it was only a split second later that the villain lost his cool completely. "What the hell's up with that? I'm gonna roast you." He started throwing fireballs with even greater speed. They were smaller than before, but it wouldn't be possible to dodge them all. That was fine with him. Izuku used the flames he'd already converted and directed them to form a shield between him and the villain. Each fireball that struck the wall of emerald was greedily devoured and converted into Izuku's flames, giving him an ever-growing barrier to protect himself and Eri with. Eri had her face buried in his shoulder, crying hysterically in fear. Izuku spared a moment to try and calm her. "It's okay. I'll protect you. Will you just die already?" Izuku's face whipped up, spotting the villain as he jumped high in the air. The man put both arms together to form a fireball the size of a small car and then hurled it at them. Izuku immediately directed his flames to intercept the massive conflagration and render it harmless. This guy really isn't holding back. How long until he ends up hitting a house? He suddenly saw a blur of motion to his right and his eyes widened in shock. The villain had landed while he'd been busy with the fireball and flanked them with surprising speed. He whipped out a knife from the inside of his suit and stabbed at Izuku. The teen desperately tried to shoot his flames at the villain, but he'd spotted the attack too late. "I won't make it die." The word was definitely one a villain would use given the situation, so it surprised Izuku even more when an explosion blew the masked criminal away from them. He yelped as a mess of spiky blonde hair landed in the spot the villain had been in just a moment before, scowling and looking exceptionally annoyed. Katsuki. "Hey, don't start a street fight without me, Deku." Katsuki snapped at him. He was wearing a pair of dark basketball shorts and a black tank top. "And pick your timing better. I'm tired, you asshat." "I'm sorry," Izuku answered quickly, directing his attention back to the villain. The man shook himself, recovering from the explosion quickly. Katsuki sneered at the beaked criminal. "Who's the rooster?" "He's a kidnapper," Izuku replied, tightening his grip around Eri, who was still buried in his shoulder. "And he's after this girl. I think she got away from him and now he's trying to get her back to his boss." "That's so." Katsuki cracked his knuckles, a maniacal grin forming on his face. "Then the sentence is death." "I already called for backup," Izuku told him quietly. "We just have to stall. His quirk lets him throw fireballs, but he's also got that knife. We should keep our distance and fight defensively. I can negate his fire if you can keep him away. Also, I don't know if he's got friends around here. We gotta watch our backs." "Geez, how fast did you come up with that, you nerd?" "Works for me, though." The blonde teen let a few small explosions pop off in his palms to warm himself up. "Let's kill his ass." The villain was fully raging now and charged them with both arms aflame. "I'm gonna turn the two of you into a pile of ashes." Izuku thrust his hand towards the charging villain, directing a stream of green fire at him. The villain dodged to the side and rushed in close. He was a lot faster than he looked. Katsuki was there in an instant, both hands held out towards the villain's face as the man closed in. Stun grenade. A burst of light and sound erupted towards the villain, setting off a bunch of car alarms and making the man howl in pain. So his mask didn't filter bright light and noise that well. Izuku seized the opportunity to channel the stream of fire after the villain, but the man's reflexes were fast enough that he avoided them and backed off. "You little are pissing me off so much," the villain screamed, lifting both hands up again. Izuku blanched as the man created a fireball that was way beyond any other before it. In a matter of seconds, it was nearly the size of a house. If that went off, it wouldn't be just them in the line of fire anymore. Izuku stood up in a flash. He had to flare up completely if he was going to stop the attack. He gripped Eri tightly and opened his mouth, about to tell Katsuki to take her so he could make full use of his quirk, but it was at that moment his backup arrived. New Hampshire. Smash. Faster than they could blink, an object not unlike a meteor slammed into the villain from behind, pulverizing him into the ground and blowing the huge fireball into cinders. The impact created a crater in the street and nearly made Izuku trip, though he yelped and stumbled from the shock of it. Izuku and Katsuki stared at the cloud of debris as it settled and a large, muscular shadow stood up within it. The first thing they saw was a shock of blonde hair and a huge grin. "It's all right now, boys. For I am here. All Might." Katsuki gaped in disbelief. How the hell why are you here? I was doing some work nearby and spotted a couple of fireballs flying around. All Might laughed, hands on his hips. His foot was keeping the now unconscious villain pinned to the ground. What are the odds you would be here? Sheesh, it seems like every time I see you two outside of school, you're fighting some villain. Slow it down some for this old man, will you? His eyes glinted at Izuku and the boy quietly sighed in relief. All Might had gotten his emergency call and come running. He'd given Izuku that number solely for emergencies, telling him under no circumstances was he to call it otherwise. You're fine to shut your flames down, young Izuku, All Might told him, glancing down at the villain. He's in no shape to fight anymore. All right, Izuku stammered, willing the emerald flames still flowing around them to dissipate and die out. The second they were gone, he smiled at All Might. Thanks for saving us. Of course, but if I might be so curious, the symbol of peace lifted the villain up by the collar with one hand and studied his now broken mask. Why did you need saving in the first place? Izuku told everything he knew to All Might, all the while holding Eri close to him. She was staring at All Might with even wider eyes than before, as though she couldn't believe the villain had been crushed so easily. All Might scratched his chin. I see, in that case, let's first get this little one to a hospital to make sure she's not hurt and to ensure you two are all right. After that, I'll get you boys home, but expect an interview with the police investigators tomorrow or the day after. They'll need your testimony to charge this guy. Katsuki shoved his hands into his pockets. He looked irritated again. I didn't even get to kill this guy. All Might's sweat dropped, looking to Izuku for some sort of explanation to that statement. The team laughed nervously. He's mad that he didn't get to beat the guy up. It's fortunate you didn't, though. The fact that you could have been injured aside, neither of you are officially qualified for hero work yet, All Might said. I know that, Katsuki huffed. It's still annoying, though. I understand. Come now, let's get you all to the hospital. And you should probably call your parents on the way to tell them you're all right. All Might called up a friend of his from the police and got them all transferred to the hospital in less than an hour while another escort took the villain to a prison. Once they got to the hospital, Izuku and Katsuki made it through the doctor's examinations in record time. Neither of them had been hurt in the fight, so they were deemed fine after just 15 minutes. But Eri was a completely different matter. She absolutely refused to let go of Izuku, and as soon as one of the doctors picked up a needle to take a small blood sample, she started sobbing until they put it away. The poor girl was utterly traumatized, and it took Izuku's reassurances and the better part of 2 hours for them to get even simple things like her weight, height, and blood pressure. When Izuku finally convinced her to let him remove her bandages, his face went pale. Dotting her arm along the inside of her elbow were a number of scars that looked an awful lot like insertion wounds from a needle. Someone had been either injecting something into her or taking something out for a long time. After seeing them, the doctors decided that extending the amount of time she was exposed to the environment in the hospital would only stress her further and be a negative influence on her health. They did a quick check for infections, then gave Izuku a few alcohol wipes to clean any open wounds Eri would not let them touch her, and some fresh bandages. Izuku walked Eri to the hospital lobby, where All Might was waiting along with Izuku's mother, Inko. Katsuki had already been taken home by his parents. Inko rushed towards her son and swept him up into a hug. I'm so glad you're okay. I know you said you were all right, but I was so worried. Izuku hugged her back with his right arm. Eri was still clinging to his left. I'm sorry I scared you. I know, she sighed, letting him go and sniffling. Inko wiped away her tears with a handkerchief and looked at the frightened child holding onto Izuku. And who is this? This is Eri, Izuku replied, offering the girl a small smile. Eri, this is my mom, Inko. Hi. The girl managed a small squeak, but remained attached to Izuku's side. Inko smiled at the child gently. Hello, Eri, I'm happy to meet you. All Might finished talking to the doctor in charge of Eri's examination, nodding as the man turned and left to tend to his other patients. The symbol of peace looked from Eri to Izuku. Well, she's clear to leave. They don't think it's wise to keep her here since it stresses her out so badly. But where do we take her? Izuku asked with a frown. I mean, we don't even know who her parents are. It's a problem, All Might admitted. But if your mother agrees to it, I was thinking she could spend a night at your home. She's obviously more comfortable with you than anyone else right now. I can take her to UA if we need to, but I think it's best if she's with someone she trusts for tonight. She's been through a lot. Izuku looked at his mother. Mom, I don't mind, Inko replied, smiling again. Of course she can spend the night. All Might nodded. Bring her up to UA tomorrow and we'll figure out where to go from there. More than likely, the police will find a foster home to take custody of her for a short while until her parents can be located. Okay. Izuku knelt down so he was eye level with Eri and smiled at her. Does that sound good, Eri? We'll have a sleepover tonight at my house. Eri didn't have even the foggiest idea of what a sleepover was, but she didn't really care as long as she got to stay with this boy. She had never felt safe with another person in her entire life. His hands were so gentle and kind and just protective. The feeling was completely alien to her, but she never wanted it to go away. So she gave him a shy smile and dipped her head. Okay. Fortunately, there was still a supermarket open with just 10 minutes left before closing time, so after Inko picked up Izuku and Eri from the hospital, she drove them out there to find some clothes for the girl. The white dress she wore was dirty from her running through the streets and small burn marks after the battle. Seeing as it was more or less ruined and she didn't have any other clothes, Inko decided that she needed to buy some more for the little girl. They hurried inside to grab some pajamas and a few simple outfits for Eri and got out in record time. Once that was out of the way, Inko took them straight back to the apartment. I'll get a bath going for Eri, Inko told them as she removed her shoes by the door and set her purse down on the counter. Izuku, would you mind heating up dinner? It's in a container in the fridge. I will, he replied. Eri was still holding his hand, looking around the apartment with her large, red eyes. Izuku looked down at her. Are you hungry? Eri nodded shyly at him. A little. Her tummy rumbled loudly, causing the girl to squeak and blush. She looked away from Izuku out of embarrassment, but he only smiled gently. Me too. Come on. Let's get something to eat. Okay. Inko had made pork cutlets and rice for dinner, which Izuku extracted from the fridge and moved to a plate so it could be heated up in the microwave. As it warmed up, the delicious scent of the meal started to fill the room and Izuku realized with amusement that Eri was staring at the microwave with her adorable button nose twitching while she drooled from the smell. As soon as it was warmed up, he divided their dinner evenly onto 2 plates and got Eri situated in a chair beside him at the table. The girl's eyes started to sparkle as she gaped openly at the delicious food laying before her, but she glanced at Izuku nervously, as though she wasn't sure if it was okay for her to have it. Izuku took his chopsticks and picked up one of the pork cutlets on his plate, then blew on it for a moment to cool it before he bit into it. Eri was still watching him, so he smiled while chewing and nodded. She tried using the chopsticks as well, but it became clear after a few tries that she had no idea what she was doing. Eri pouted and glared at the utensils in frustration until Izuku helped her out, showing her how to hold them and pick up her food. When she finally took a bite of the pork cutlet, her eyes sparkled even more and she almost forgot to chew in her haste to eat the delicious meal. Is it good? Izuku asked. MMHMM. She hummed back, her mouth stuffed full of food. They ate in relative silence until Inko came back into the kitchen. Eri, the bath is ready. Let's get you cleaned up, okay. Eri swallowed and looked at Izuku nervously, waiting until he smiled at her reassuringly before she answered Inko. Okay. She tugged on Izuku's sleeve as she got out of her chair and it took him a moment to realize that she wanted him to come along. He glanced at his mother, who nodded silently, smiling somewhat in amusement. All right, I'll come too. They got Eri into the bathroom where Inko had her take off her dirty white dress and underwear before helping the girl get into the tub of warm water. Izuku was a little flustered by the whole experience. He didn't know a lot about children and he knew even less about bathing them, so Inko took the lead. She got Eri cleaned up with body wash while Izuku poured some shampoo into the girl's hair and gently worked the soap through the messy white locks. Eri was halfway leaning out of the tub throughout it all so that she could hold onto Izuku's shirt sleeve, only letting go when Inko had to clean her arms and hands, and then she immediately reattached herself to the teenager. Inko could already see that Eri had become very dependent on Izuku. Anyone else getting this attached so quickly would probably not be a good thing, but kids were different. She knew from experience how impressionable children were and how easily they could form attachments. If Eri really had had no positive relationships in her life so far, it was no surprise to Inko why she had latched onto Izuku with such fervor. He had been the first person to show her kindness, the first to protect her, and the one who saved her from those terrible people. In Eri's mind, Izuku was literally the only safe place in the world. It didn't matter if she knew nothing about him because she had realized that he would not hurt her. To a child like her, whose world growing up had probably been hostile at best, that was more than enough of a reason to stay close to him. As soon as Eri had been cleaned up, Inko helped dry her off with a towel and then got Eri changed into some fresh pajamas while Izuku took a quick shower after Izuku assured Eri he would be back as fast as he could. Because Inko was so used to buying clothing like this for Izuku when he was Eri's age, they were All Might-themed pajama pants and a sweater to keep the girl warm. As soon as she was changed, Inko took a brush and carefully worked it through the girl's hair. Izuku walked out of the bathroom in shorts and a white t-shirt just as Inko nodded, happy with the image of Eri looking full, clean, and sleepy in her new pajamas. Okay, now you two get your teeth brushed and then get to bed. Izuku, there should be a spare toothbrush for Eri in the cabinet next to the sink. I'll get it, he promised, letting Eri take his hand again. She yawned, eyes drooping from sleepiness. As soon as their teeth were brushed, Eri held her arms up towards Izuku in the universal gesture all children made when they wanted to be picked up. Izuku did so after a short pause to figure out how to do it right and got the little girl bundled up safely in his arms. Eri wrapped her small arms around his neck and clutched at his shirt, her eyes barely open. Izuku got them to his room, lifted the covers so that he could lay Eri down, but she whimpered after a moment. It's dark. Would a little light make it better? He asked. She nodded jerkily and he made a mental note that she didn't like dark places. Okay, one moment, I'm sure I've still got it here somewhere. Still carrying Eri, Izuku walked to his bedstand and opened the drawer. He rummaged through it for a minute before pulling out an All Might-themed nightlight he'd had as a child when he was also scared of the dark. Here we go. He plugged it in and All Might's teeth glowed white, not blindingly so, but enough to keep the room from being really dark. Izuku looked at Eri. Is that better? She nodded, relaxing somewhat. Izuku got them into his bed and situated Eri so she was lying next to him, but that proved to be pointless because she crawled over and buried herself into his shirt as much as she could, tucking her legs up into his stomach. He couldn't help but smile at her and used his hand to brush aside some of her white hair behind the small horn on her forehead. Then he got his arms wrapped around the girl and curled his body around her, shielding her from the world as best he could. Good night, Eri. She managed some mumbled, incoherent reply, but Izuku knew she was more or less asleep now, so he just closed his eyes and slowly drifted off to sleep. Class 1A was already in their seats for homeroom and Mr. Aizawa had just walked in, but as they got themselves ready for the day, they came to the realization that one of their classmates was missing. Izuku's not here, Momo asked, raising an eyebrow. That's odd, Tenya scratched his chin. He's not the type to be late. Is he sick? Eijiro glanced at Katsuki. Hey man, did Izuku text you or anything to say what was up? Katsuki scowled. What am I, his mom? I don't know what's taking the nerd, either. In the back of his mind, he was actually wondering just where in the hell Izuku had ended up. No one had told him anything about it since last night, but was it possible there had been more villain trouble involving the girl he and Izuku had saved? The thought already had his fingers twitching. He was gonna be fidgety and in a bad mood until he got some answers. Regardless, let's get class started, Aizawa muttered, looking as tired as ever. It looks like everyone's here except for Izuku. Sorry I'm late. The door flew open and everyone looked towards it, finding their class president standing there as they expected, but they weren't expecting the small child attached to his left hand peeking out from behind him. Eri was wearing an All Might-themed hoodie over a pale yellow dress, long white socks, and a pair of yellow sandals. Aizawa just stared at Izuku, who was smiling nervously, and the even more nervous-looking girl who was locked onto him for a moment before he glanced back at the schedule for the day. Moving on. That's it. Half the class exclaimed in disbelief. Hold up, we're just gonna skim over the fact that Izuku brought a kid to school. Denki demanded. She's cute, but why is she here? Suyu asked. Izuku scratched the back of his head. Well, I am here to explain. Izuku and Eri both yelped and jumped in perfect sync as All Might popped up behind them, waving his hand at the rest of the class. They had met with him upon arriving at school, but they had thought he was still speaking with Inko in his office. Aizawa looked mildly annoyed. All Might, don't barge in so early in the morning. Sorry, Aizawa, the symbol of peace apologized. I'll make this short and sweet. The class waited for him to give them an explanation for the current situation. Ahem, for reasons, Eri here will be with Izuku for a little bit. Get along, everyone. He gave them a thumbs up and his trademark wide grin. Rikido was less than satisfied with that answer. That's too short and it's not sweet at all. Coming from the Sugar Man, that's harsh, Honta muttered. Seriously though, that's all you're telling us? Sorry, but I can't tell you much right now, All Might apologized. For the time being, I just need you all to cooperate with Izuku so Eri feels comfortable, okay? Thank you. The pro took off then, probably running back to his office so he could deflate and save energy on his time limit, leaving the class in an awkward silence. Izuku smiled with an equal amount of awkwardness. That's how it is. So this is Eri. Eri, these are my friends. They're nice, just a little noisy sometimes. Eri peeked out from behind Izuku again and gave the class a nearly silent greeting. Hi. Oh my glob, she's adorable. Mina squealed, almost jumping out of her seat. Can I hug her? Aizawa sighed. Stay in your seat, Mina. Izuku, go grab an extra chair from the back for Eri. The rest of you listen up, will you? Time is limited. Be more rational. So while Izuku led Eri to the back of the room to get an extra chair, Aizawa looked over his papers for the day. Today we're going to be taking a break from the combat training we've been doing the last couple of days. Being a hero isn't just about fighting villains, you know. An even bigger part of it is rescuing people. That's going to be the scenario we'll tackle today. Rescue training. You'll be supervised by a team of 3 including myself, All Might, and one other pro teaching here. When you come to the hero course later in the day, you can change into your costumes if you want, but it's not completely necessary this time. Some of your costumes probably aren't designed for these kinds of tasks yet, after all. Since the training area is fairly far away, we'll get there by bus. Do me a favor and hurry there when it's time. Aizawa grabbed his sleeping bag after that. That's all for homeroom. You'd best prepare yourselves for the trial ahead, kids. As soon as they got the all clear, Katsuki spun around in his desk to look at Izuku and Eri, who probably couldn't be sitting any closer to him if the seats were fused together. Explain. She ended up staying with Mom and I after what happened, Izuku replied, keeping his voice low so the other students wouldn't hear, even as some of them got up to come over. All Might wants me to keep quiet about it, but she just feels safe with me, I guess. Katsuki glanced at Eri, who looked back at him nervously, and shrugged. Fair enough. That reminds me, how did you find us last night? Izuku asked him. It was too far away for you to hear anything from home, wasn't it? Oh yeah, I forgot with all the craziness last night. Katsuki grabbed his bag and stuffed his arm into it for a few moments, rummaging around before he yanked out an All Might-themed wallet. You left this on the table, moron. Mom made me run after you to give it back. Sorry. Izuku took it back gratefully and pocketed it. But thanks for showing up. You're buying me extra spicy chicken wings after school. Yep, that was all they could say before half the class surrounded them, some eager, some curious to get a look at Eri. The girl cringed away from them and completely abandoned her chair to crawl into Izuku's lap and hide there, burying her face in his neck. Katsuki saw that and barked at their classmates. Do you scrubs have nothing else to do? Back off or I'll kill you. Izuku wrapped his arms around Eri and smiled apologetically at his classmates. Sorry, she's pretty shy. Can you guys give us a bit of space? Oh, okay. Ochako, who was at the front of the group, backed up with the others so Izuku and Eri weren't boxed in and then crouched, sitting on her heels. She could see that the little girl was really nervous, so she offered her a bright smile. Eri, right, hi, Eri, I'm Ochako. Izuku gently rubbed Eri's back, reassuring her that everything was okay. It's all right, Eri, they won't hurt you. Eri shifted just enough so that she could peer at them with one eye and tried to return the greeting. Hello. Suddenly, her eyes fixed on a dark, beak-shaped Izuku's classmate, Fumikage. Eri stared at the falcon-headed boy for a grand total of 3 seconds before she held in her breath and paled in terror. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.